listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Have the cheese-eating surrender monkeys in the Elysee robbed the Anglosphere of their war with Russia, for which they have been demonstrably gagging? President Macron rides to the rescue to try and save the peace. I say sacre bleu and hats off to you, little fellow. And Boris Johnson and Joe Biden may well come to regret stabbing France in the back over the AUKUS deal with Australia. I don't care why Macron is trying to stop the war, but I do care that on a prominent local radio station just an hour ago, a queenly presenter on that station described me as a fifth columnist. What are you going to do? Shoot me for standing against war? We'll be talking about the Canadian truckers. We'll be talking about the actual Queen, Elizabeth, now diagnosed as having COVID-19. Get well soon, ma'am, and even longer life to you. I didn't write this poll that they've put out tonight, and I'd be voting no in it. I think the management just wanted to be provocative. And we'll be talking about the Conservatives, Boris Johnson, and Partygate. It's war, royals, Tories, and goodness knows what else. Over the next 3 hours, stay tuned, fasten your seatbelt, because it's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Watching the Anglo-Saxon war machine, mechanized mendacity, moving across the terrain of public opinion is an awesome sight. I've seen it before, of course, in the run-up to Iraq, but given that that ended in 1 million dead people, ISIS and Al-Qaeda cascading around the whole world, no weapons of mass destruction, the whole thing an unmitigated disaster, I honestly didn't think they would try it quite the same way again. I certainly didn't think that a considerable number of Pavlov's dogs would rally to the same old messages from the same old messengers. But I'm afraid I was wrong. It is a chastening experience. I thought the public had more sense. I thought the broadcasting and media class had more shame. More fool me. Actually, they are utterly shameless. The journalists and broadcasters have no need to be bribed or twist. The average British and American journalist will lie on cue and with such conviction that one is waiting for them to take the onion from their pocket, hold it to their nose and begin to cry like maddos on screen about poor, plucky Nazi Azov battalion in the Ukrainian National Guard, currently firing shells and mortars and even heavier artillery bringing up the rear on the line of control between eastern Ukraine and the Ukrainian coup government in Kiev. I suppose all of my protestations have probably been in vain. I told you from the beginning of this crisis that it was a complete lie that Russia was preparing to invade Ukraine. But I also told you from the first that Ukraine was probably preparing to invade. 30% of its own population who live in the east of the country in the self-proclaimed People's Breakaway Republics. These are ethnically Russian people for whom Russian is the language, a language completely delegitimized on the very night that the parliament building in Kiev was set on fire. The president set scarpering out of the country, and the MPs held at gunpoint until they signed the law which delegitimized the Russian language. Unfortunately for the coup mobsters, there is 30% of the country that simply can't indeed accept that, because Russian is their language. They are ethnically Russian, and hundreds of thousands of them, indeed, are dual citizens with Russia. So you had irresistible force meets immovable object. And a desultory but very bloody war continued for several years along that line of control until the Minsk agreements. The Minsk agreements, of course, are the property of the Security Council of the United Nations, which adopted them in toto and unanimously. And therefore, the Minsk agreements have the power of international law. But a window into the soul of the enemies of peace was given, perhaps unwittingly, by the head of the Moscow Bureau of the Carnegie Foundation. I do hope he's not in Moscow. I do hope the Russian government has begun to move these kind of Trojan horses along. But whether he is in Moscow or not, he's the head of the Moscow Bureau. He said last night on social media, the game is now clear. Russia seeks to coerce the Ukrainian government into implementing the Minsk agreements. How do you coerce someone into an agreement they've already signed? Of course, they haven't implemented it, but shouldn't everyone be seeking to coerce them to do so? Why is it being left to Russia to coerce them to do so? What about Germany and France, who are co-signatories with the Ukraine government to the Minsk agreement? What about the United Nations Security Council, which has now embraced the Minsk agreements as their own? What do the Minsk agreements do? They call for a ceasefire along that line of control. They call for the withdrawal of foreign forces from that area. It's going to be difficult now that it's stuffed full of foreign soldiers and mercenaries and Western-supplied weapons paid for by you, the taxpayer in America and in Britain. And they call for the granting of autonomous status for the Donbass region, which is currently being heavily attacked by the forces of the Ukrainian military, including their fascist boot boys grouped around the Azov battalion. Now, if I'm right, and if this bombardment becomes a general offensive, and all of the troop movements suggest that it is, then, of course, a full-scale attack on the ethnically Russian people next door to Russia is going to bring Russia into the war. And if Russia enters the war, it might as well continue it. I don't speak for Russia. I don't know the Russian mind in this. I can only tell you what I would do. I would say, if you will not push back NATO's tanks from my lawn, I will have to push them back for you. If you continue to encroach further and further to the Russian state borders, I'll have to do something about it. It will be military and it will be technical, to use the words that the Russians use. I have no idea what that military technical response will be, but I suspect that the West and its satrapies will not like it. This has been a war of choice, not by the West, as you keep hearing on the state-mandated British Broadcasting Corporation, because Germany and France are in the West, not by the international community, because Germany and France and Russia and China and India and Iran and the Arab world and the African world and the Asian world are all part of the international community. You arrogant hypocrites, what they mean is the Anglosphere, the AUKUS, Australia, UK, US, the Anglosphere, the Five Eyes. That's what they mean by the West. That's what they mean by the international community, and it's time the entire world told them, your days of ruling the waves, your days of ordering other people around and invading and occupying them at will are over. And if you won't accept it, we'll have to prove it to you by force of arms on the battlefield. That's my point of view. It may or may not be Russia's. But who's that I hear? Who's that little fellow in his golden hose coming out of the Elysee Palace? It's little Macron. He's been on the blower all day to Putin, and he's got a solution. He wants to broker by this night a ceasefire on the line of control between Ukraine and the autonomous republics it agreed to in the Minsk agreements. He wants a summit at what he calls the highest level. He'll need to sit on a few cushions if it's at the highest level. But good old Macron, I say, the French people don't want war. The German people don't want war. That's why they didn't send any weapons. Perhaps it was the presence of the swastikas and the death's head insignias and the jackboots and the goose-stepping and the swastika flags flying in Kiev that put them off. All they sent were clean helmets with no swastikas on them. And they didn't let Britain send weapons to the Kiev regime either. They forced them to fly around German airspace. If President Macron succeeds, then he deserves the praise of all humanity. I know he's doing it for revenge on Joe Biden and Boris Johnson for stabbing him in the back and stealing 100 million euros from France in the aborted French submarine deal with the Australians. You can't steal billions of people's money and expect them to be sanguine about it. No. I know he's doing it because he's got a presidential election coming up very soon. I know that. I don't care why he's doing it. He's doing it. Just like Chirac had the courage to stand up against the Anglo-American bullies over the Iraq War. Just like Herr Schroeder, Herr Schultz has made it clear that Germany wants no part of this. I'll tell you what, Europe, I tell you this with all the power of my being. If you don't stop being led by the nose by Boris Johnson and Joe Biden, your countries will be the ones that will pay the highest price in war, and in economic and financial ruin. It's your people that will pay the highest price. It's about time you stood up to the bully boys. Now, Her Majesty the Queen's not well. I'm very sorry to hear it. I wish her even longer life. I'd be voting no in our poll. Is it now time for Her Majesty the Queen to abdicate? A, yes. B, no. I myself don't want Her Majesty the Queen to abdicate, but I demand a referendum when in the fullness of time she passes, as all must pass, because I ain't going quietly into the reign of bonkers Charles and Queen Camilla. I promise you that. I will agitate everywhere on every platform that Britain must be given the choice between monarchy and democracy. That's the choice, and we in Britain have to decide when to take it. But having said all that, with the COVID and with a son who just paid £12 million sterling to a woman he's never met, with whom he never danced, with whom he never sweated. As a matter of fact, he was in Pizza Express in Woking at the time in question. A woman he didn't put his arm round, a woman he didn't meet in Ghislaine Maxwell's apartment, a woman he was never photographed with, a woman he's never met. He gave her £12 million in a New York City courtroom just this week. I drove past the palace this evening. There's a very long queue of women that Andrew has never met, offering to make a settlement with him for less than £12 million. One after the other. Her children have disappointed her. The only one worth the proverbial pitcher of warm human fluids is Princess Anne. But she was ruled out from the start because she was the wrong gender. Long before the gender wars broke out, Princess Anne was ruled out because she didn't have a dick. Just think about that. So we'll be talking about the war. We'll be talking about the royals. But we can't talk about Andrew without talking about the strange death of Jean-Luc Brunel. Who was Jean-Luc Brunel? He was a pimp for the pimp Ghislaine Maxwell and the pervert and spy Jeffrey Epstein. Jean-Luc was in jail. It was a modern jail. It had all mod cons, including security cameras. But in yet another astounding coincidence, the cameras in Jean-Luc's cell weren't working when he too wrapped the paper sheets around his neck and hanged himself until he was dead. And if you believe any of that, I have a bridge here in London I can sell you, going very, very cheap. This is like a second-rate mafia movie where all the chief suspects keep getting bumped off before they can talk in the court and incriminate the rich and powerful for whom these pimps were supplying. How come we know the name of every donor that gave money to the Canadian Freedom Convoy Fund, but we don't know a single name of the people for whom Epstein and Maxwell and Brunel were pimping? How come they're all redacted? Shouldn't we know the name of the rich and powerful people, presidents, prime ministers, members of the royal family, princes of the church, princes of Wall Street, princes of international capitalism? Shouldn't we know their names? In this day and age? Or are they going to bump off Ghislaine Maxwell next? Is that their game? Lastly, just as I came on air, I discovered that there's another giant bank leak. This one from Credit Suisse. 80 billion pounds worth of deposits from thieves and criminals everywhere who stole that money from their people and who were allowed to lodge it in a respectable bank called Credit Suisse. Some of them even after they were convicted of murder. Some of them after they were convicted of people trafficking. Some of them when they were wanted by their own country after they had been driven out of power. I haven't had time to digest it fully yet, but I have looked down it far enough to see that the sinister torturer of the Mubarak regime in Egypt, Omar Suleiman, who kidnapped me and the editor of this show, Ron Mackay, in the dead of night, bundled us into an unmarked van, drove us through the desert, had me waking up the British ambassador in the middle of the night to tell him men without uniforms have kidnapped me and are taking me across the desert. Help! Omar Suleiman, a police officer, a humble police officer in poor, dear Egypt. He had a bank account at Credit Suisse with $300 million in it. A torturer, Omar. That we knew. A torturer and a thief. Oh, I really do hope one day, if not now, then on the judgment day, I get to give evidence against you. It's all coming up in the next 3 hours because it is the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukeman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
All talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Well, I said a lot, but you are welcome to have your say back. If you disagree with the stand that I'm taking, your call will be prioritized. If you're a first-time caller, your call will be prioritized. If you're a woman caller, your call will be prioritized. And if you're a first-time woman caller who disagrees with me, you'll be on the show before you can say Jack Robinson. Here's the number. If you're in the United Kingdom, it's 08081965522. And if you're in the United States or Canada, it's also toll-free, completely free. +1 844 944 3344. Speaking of Canada, I opined in the week that whenever working class people rise up in however incoherent a way and seek to seize control of their own destiny like in the Brexit referendum in 2016, or like on the streets of Ottawa right now, and not just Ottawa, and not just Canada, when blue-collar drivers, truckers, take to the highways to challenge the power of a neoliberal state. The default position of everyone, especially the liberals, and even what calls itself the left, is to brand them all racist, or even worse than that. I'm joined by the one and only Kim Iversen, who really is a media star. She's the host of the Kim Iversen Show. She's an independent political analyst of very great note. It's an honor, Kim, to have you here. Can we start on this point that I just made? What is it about the liberals that they are actually, when you scratch them or take their blackface off, the most authoritarian, tyrannical people of them all?
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show, first of all. I would say that it's not necessarily, right now, I agree that in this time period, it's the liberals that are behaving in this way. But it isn't because they're liberal. It isn't historically liberals. It's really elites. And the liberals here in the United States and in Canada and around the world have become the elites in society. For a long time, it was conservatives who were the elites, and they would be the ones who would crack down on protesters or call them names, you know, looking at them low class, right? It's always the elite that looks at these uprisings from working class people or poor people, and they snub their noses at them and say, these are low class people, ignorant people. They don't know anything. We're the moral superior. We know better. And that is more of an elite versus the bourgeoisie and the proletariat sort of scenario going on. And so what has happened over the last couple of decades is that the liberals in society have become the highly educated elites and those who believe that they're in the moral, they're in the moral right, that they hold the keys to morality and what is right and wrong, and these other people are just low class.
Yes, a basket of deplorables, as Clinton famously called them. But how do you claim to be on the moral high ground when you, for example, deal with protesters by trampling them under horseback, by freezing their bank accounts, by making their children go hungry, by having them kicked out of their jobs? All of these things have happened in Canada under the supreme liberal. If liberalism had a king, it would be Trudeau. And he's the one doing all of this.
Yeah, it's, well, they do it under the guise of defeating racism, right? So that has kind of been the moral torch that liberals have been holding on to for a long time, saying, well, we are the ones fighting against racism, racism, racism. And so what we've seen is that anything they don't agree with, they've decided is racist. So even though these protests have nothing to do with race at all, mandates have nothing to do with race. These people are not on the streets in Canada protesting, for example, immigration. They're not protesting, whether or not certain people could become citizens or whether or not they should accept refugees into the country. They're not having any sort of conversation or protesting at all about anything to do with race. This has everything to do with vaccine mandates. And that is what these people are protesting against. But liberals somehow, some way connect it to racism, unclear how they do it. The woman who was trampled by a horse by the Ottawa police is a clan leader for the Mohawk tribe. She's not white, obviously. She's a native, and yet she was trampled by cops. And so everything is under this guise of, well, we're the moral superiors because we are fighting racism. And now anything and everything we don't agree with is racist or right-wing, and right-wing means racist.
Yeah, I mean, it's long been a practice, some decades. It's even before Clinton, that people have become used to calling the person one place to the right of them racist, and 3 places to the right of them fascists. And then close them down. You're right to make the point that it used to be conservatives that did these things, but the cancel culture is ineluctably joined to this power of the elites. It's the elites, and I call them liberals, but you're right, they're not doing it because they're liberals, perhaps. They're doing it because they're the elites, right, who seek to cancel everyone who disagrees with them. First, by hurling these epithets at them, and if possible, to actually close them down. Now, that's true in Canada. It's true in the United States where you are. It's true here in Britain.
Well, in Canada, they're really cracking down on these protesters. I never thought in my lifetime I would see something like this in a country that declares itself to be a Western democracy. It's the same sort of thing we've seen in Australia during the pandemic, and it's just shocking. But in Canada right now, these police are out there. They're rounding people up. The police chief in Ottawa has said that he's going to hunt down protesters. So even if they leave the protest and they go home, he's saying, I'm going to find out who you are that participated in these protests. We're going to go after you. I mean, it is just the most dystopian, anti-liberal, anti-democratic scenario that we're seeing right now, all because people want to have a choice on which medicines they take. I mean, it's unbelievable that that is what this is about. This is just about people wanting to choose which medicine to take. And they're calling them racist, they're calling them fascists, they're calling them terrorists, and they're hunting them down, seizing their money, forcing them to lose their jobs, even saying that they're going to confiscate their pets and then relinquish their pets, give their pets up for adoption for someone else because they protested the right to do what they would like, to make their medical decisions between them and their doctor. It's unbelievable. It is.
As I hear you describe it so eloquently, it is actually unbelievable, not least because forced medication, with redolent of all its fascistic and Nazi past, would once have been a cause for the liberals and the left themselves to be out on the street.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I kind of wonder if Donald Trump were in office and he was the one mandating and still the one saying we got to get everybody vaccinated in order to get the country back to normal. I do think it would be the other side actually protesting this. I think it would be liberals on the street saying my body, my choice, like they have for decades. But they're taking up this actually more of the fascist viewpoint, which is, no, you must take this medicine. You must wear these masks at all time, or you will lose your job. And they're taking that position almost to own Donald Trump. I mean, they're harming themselves. They're harming their children. They're forcing people into these medications that maybe a person does or does not want to take. And they're doing it all just to own Trump. I mean, it's so it is literally Trump derangement syndrome.
Yes, and they've definitely got that. So let's turn to that wider perspective, because of course you can't be sure. There are a lot of sheep in the world in human form, but I can't help thinking Canada has been changed forever by the events, and it will not end well for Trudeau and his gang, as it didn't end well for Hillary Clinton. But though they've obviously made a comeback in the form of Joe Biden, but that's not going well either. How do you think all these phenomena are going to play out in, say, the next 5 years in political developments in North America?
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing is a flipping of the parties. So what the conservatives used to always sort of stand for, now liberals tend to be standing for instead. So conservatives were all about being, following the law, doing what the government says, and now liberals are the ones saying, no, you must obey, obey or else. And we're seeing conservatives now being the ones, Republicans or people on the right, who are saying, hey, wait a minute, this isn't a free society and I want to live in a free society. So we're seeing sort of, I think, more of a political realignment happening. And I think the way that it plays out is that we're going to see more power grabs by the government in order to try to squash this uprising of the proletariat, if you will, this rising up of the working class. And we're going to see the government doing more, like we're seeing in Canada with them now making protests illegal. We're seeing more and more of this power grab. And I think people will ultimately, I do think, unfortunately, it will take decades, but I do think people will rise up, and there will be the same sort of thing that's happened to conservatives over the years, over the decades, with civil rights movements, for example. I think we're going to see happen, but to liberals instead. They'll be the ones who are holding people back, holding progress back. And it'll be these populist people who are instead looking for progress. So it'll be an interesting shift. Unfortunately, I do think it will be a decades-long process.
And how will it play out in the media? Now, they're gunning for Tucker Carlson. Just like Trump, he turns out to be an agent of the Kremlin, according to the liberals. They are gunning for Joe. They've gunned for Jimmy Dore. And yet, the numbers watching your show, Jimmy Dore's show, Joe Rogan's show, my show, the numbers go up and up and up the more they attack us. What are they going to do about us?
They're going to deplatform. I mean, they're going to do everything they possibly can, and people are just going to have to get together. I know Trump is starting his own sort of social media platform empire that he's going to be releasing, and I think there's others out there like Rumble. There's others that are doing what they can to sort of combat this sort of takeover. But I do think that they will continue to push and try to deplatform and silence and smear, just like conservatives did for many, many years against people that lived an alternative lifestyle, that, people weren't allowed to come out of the closet, or people weren't allowed to live life the way that they, be in interracial relationships even, or what, back in the day, there was all of this judgment, and you would be banned or shunned from society if you thought a certain way or lived a certain way. And I think we're seeing that same sort of thing, but it's flipping, and now it's coming from liberals. So I think that people will kind of create their own underground, in a way, societies, underground media, underground. But nowadays it won't be exactly like underground newspapers, but similar, right, where it is sort of alternative, but ends up being very popular and ends up being more mainstream, actually, than what the mainstream is trying to be.
Yeah. I've lived so long, Kim. I've been witch hunted by both the right and the left.
Me too.
Now, tell the viewers, please, how people can follow your tremendous show.
Oh, thank you. Well, I am on YouTube, Rumble. I'm also on Locals and Rockfin. So if you just Google Kim Iversen Show, just go to KimIversenShow.com. That'll get you to the YouTube channel, and then from there you can get all the links to the other sites. So, and I'm also on The Hills Rising every morning as well.
You're tremendous, I must say. I hope
Thank
this
you.
is not the last time that we talk. Kim Iversen of the Kim Iversen Show. Thank you for joining us. Is it now time for Her Majesty the Queen to abdicate? These are surprising figures to me. A, yes, 35%. B, no, 65%. But that's on Twitter. On YouTube, it's yes, 58%. No, 42%. And on Telegram, it's yes, 59%, no, 41%. You can still vote for the next hour or more, actually, an hour and a half. So get voting either on my Twitter feed or on my YouTube or on my Telegram. Now, apparently the social media is powerful, but it's not yet reached me. So let me give you again the numbers, 08081965522. And if you're in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. I think the printer has actually overheated the number of social media comments. Blank says yes, and she should dissolve the monarchy. Given his past behavior, if Charles wants to be head of state, he should stand for election. And Alan says the Queen promised never to abdicate at the start of her reign. Well, that promise has been made by royals before. And New York Fog says that suit looks tailor-made, not a crease, fits like a glove. Thank you for that, sir. It's actually from Marks and Spencer, and it's just a jacket, not a suit. I've got Levi 501s underneath. Stuart Wheeler says, Her Majesty should be allowed to see out the remainder of a long life of service, be buried with full honours by a grateful nation, and the whole squalid organisation of royalty should then be disbanded forever. Britain would then emerge blinking into the light of the 21st century. Stuart Wheeler, I could not have put that better myself. And Marek says, absolutely not, George. I agree with you on many things, but I don't want the UK to become a republic. Mary Jasper says the Queen will never abdicate. She always viewed with horror the abdication of her uncle, who walked away from his duty. Though as things turned out, especially with his Nazi sympathies, thank goodness for us that he did. But for the Queen, it meant her father's early death. And Scouse Alarm, my old pal in Liverpool, whose wedding I'll be attending, it's the wedding of the summer. The monarchy should end when the Queen passes, or at the very least there should be a referendum on becoming a republic. Monarchies which cost the taxpayer an extraordinary amount of money shouldn't be a thing in 2022. And TV and film stars says, yes, and William should be king. Gav says, time for the whole royal family to abdicate. Padge says, it pains me to say that abdication isn't required. Her Majesty is looking very frail of late, and I worry she won't be around too much longer. She has been magnificent for 70 years as monarch. Her service has been incredible, and I'm proud to be a loyal subject. God save the Queen. Firestarter says, yes, let's have a Trump, Putin, Macron, Biden, Johnson, Branson as head of state. God help us. The Queen, God bless her. Of course, that's not the only alternative to having a monarchy, but let's have a referendum on it. Agree with me on that at least. And Ruben says, ready for a republic, but let her see out her time in peace. She has enough problems. Amen, Ruben, I'm with you. And Shahid says, good evening, George, lovely show. Yes, I think the Queen should retire and rest at her age. She's done more than enough, and we all love and care about her health. And Sir Les says, I've got to read the whole name, it's really good. Sir Les Go Brandon says, whether the Queen abdicates or not, it's time to work out a sensible way to end this national soap opera. And Caroline says, yes, the Queen is frail, but please not chucking Camilla. That's what she says, Camilla. I didn't say it. Now, let me give you the first question of the evening. In 1947, on this day, Earl Mountbatten was appointed Viceroy of a country which was seeking independence. Which country was it? A, India, B, Cyprus, C, Malaya. Who knows? It could have been any or all of them. I'll be right back after the break.
There is no trick other than hard work, creativity, care, and recognizing that duty is more important than love.
The booming voice of Robert Maxwell, an arrogant man who used his publishing empire to gain him power and influence. But in this shocking account, never told before in this way, George Galloway recalls his first encounter with Maxwell.
It looked like a grizzly bear advancing towards me and punches me with these giant fists, like sides of ham, right in the solar plexus, so hard that I literally bent double.
Then, after George exposed Maxwell as a crook in Parliament, it was war.
Every one of his papers, the Daily Mirror, then following the Sunday Mirror, the Sunday People, the Daily Record, then a few days later the Sunday Mail in Scotland. Even the European, which he then owned. All over Galloway.
Scottish Daily News journalist Ron Mackay was there.
Every night, presumably when he had a drink in him, he would boom over the tannoy about the cretins, the fools. The majority of the workforce believed that he would take it over and their jobs would be secure. But of course he didn't. He just disappeared.
And then...
The millionaire newspaper publisher Robert Maxwell is dead.
What really happened? Did Robert Maxwell jump, or was he pushed?
It could be that he went out to, as he did, micturate over the side of the boat. I'm with Ghislaine Maxwell in that I lean towards the murder.
This is Maxwell, the monster.
You said, what is my secret? I will let you and your viewers know what it is. I'm not attached to property. Consequently, losing or gaining it means nothing to me.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
As I say, it could actually have been any of them, but it was, in fact, in 1947, on this day, that Earl Mountbatten became the last Viceroy of India. And what a rum character he turned out to be. He had been a rum character all of his life. No matter how high his noble royal company, he was an absolute cad, and worse than a cad. Now, that was the Maxwell promo. You can see the whole of the video series on my Patreon. I hope you'll go to it, patreon.com/George Galloway. I'm going to start a football podcast, by the way, on Patreon. I think you'll like it. We'll cover the world of football. I've been watching football, if you think about it, for longer than most people that are alive, since the age of 6 or 7 years old. And that's a long time ago. And I have 3 sons, all of whom may very well make it as professional footballers. I'm really something of an authority on the game, but I've actually found a younger fellow to do it with me who knows even more than me, especially about modern football, and can talk through the game. And we'll try and take calls and so on. It'll be fun. So to be on it, of course, you have to join my patreon.com/George Galloway. You can download the podcast version from wherever you get your podcasts from. Now, what am I going to do? What else would I do but go to Louisiana and talk with Victoria about Russia? Victoria, welcome.
How are you doing? And we love the show.
Thank you. Very nice to hear from you. Go ahead.
Okay, my question is, how is it that the UK is following the U.S. lead on the Ukraine propaganda, knowing the U.S. history, and how do the Britons feel about it?
The second part of your question is a little more complex, but the answer to the first is simple. Crocodiles, you know about them in Louisiana. Crocodiles eat people because they're crocodiles. Scorpions sting because they're scorpions. And that is the role of former empires that still want to cling to the tail, to be the tail, in fact, of the new empire, to, in some incredible triumph of conceit, imagine that although you're the tail, you could actually be the brain. You could be Greece to America's brute Rome. You can use your greater sophistication and better grasp of history and language to be the president's brain. As a matter of fact, all we are is the president's tail. And to be Joe Biden's tail, especially with his recent troubles in terms of incontinence, is a very unpleasant place to be. What do the British people think about it? Well, more British people than ever before are horrified and opposed by it. But most British people, it seems, are ready to go along with it. Over to you, Victoria.
Okay. My next question is, and I understand what you're saying truly, but the U.S. is a failing empire.
Yes.
The world knows that Russia and China will rule. So why follow a failing empire?
Yeah, well, that's the $64,000 question, as they used to say when $64,000 was rather more money than it is today. Before they bankrupted the currency, it was a lot of money, and it was the quiz show $1 million prize. Why shackle yourselves to a failing empire? Any sensible British leadership would do the opposite. It would say, we have shaken off the shackles of the European Union, and we're going to shake off the shackles of the failing American empire. We're going to be Great Britain. With our ancient history and culture and language, we're going to be a truly independent country in the world. We'll trade with anyone. We'll accept investment from anyone. We have automatic enmity towards no one and automatic fealty towards no one either. We will treat every issue that arises on the United Nations or on the international scene, we'll treat it on its merits. That's what any sensible British leadership would do. Unfortunately, Victoria, we lack such a leadership, although we're not quite as bad as your country. Thanks for that, Victoria in Louisiana. Lech is in Washington, D.C. on the Ukraine. Go ahead, Lech.
Yes, greeting to all the listeners and the people who watch your show.
Thank you.
Mr. Galloway, I go back. I remember your when you were in the U.S. Congress, you did better jobs than 10 lawyers because you told the truth.
Thank you, sir.
And the people have a telepathic, kind of sense. But when it comes to the current situation, escalation in Ukraine, I know the main thing behind it's the Silk Road, the train system from China to Belarus to Ukraine to the whole Europe. So that's number one. Number two, military industrial complex, all the Lockheed Martin base, the headquarters next to my office, Raytheon, Boeing, they have to sell more weapons. And the main thing, number three, it's the U.S. wants to sell more liquid natural gas to Germany and to the whole Europe. And, since Great Britain didn't sign the contract, long-term contract, so they are paying citizens, poor people in Great Britain, also in Poland, they're paying $2,000 equivalent. So situation is very complex. But pretty much I hope the peace will prevail, but the U.S. is doing provocations another Maidan today in the last few days. So I do believe that the only way to do is peace. And finally, because I know we have a very short time, the working class does not exist anymore in U.S. because it was industrial base was moved to the new industrialized countries, to China, Taiwan, to less expensive workforce. And
well, look, I agreed with everything that you said, Lech, until that last point. And as you say, the hour is late, so I can only respond to it in a very short way. Everything that I see around me in this studio, which is much, was made by a worker. The car I'll drive home was made by a worker. The road was dug and paved by a worker. The lights are powered by workers. The buildings around us are built, constructed by workers, designed by workers. Workers haven't gone away. Depending on your work to live makes you working class. And well over 90% of the people depend on their work in order to live. Thanks for that. Fra's in Belfast, my old friend. Go ahead, Fra.
Thank you very much, George. Thank you for taking the call.
Welcome.
George, it's just on the Ukraine. Obviously, I visited and I was an election monitor there, and I think it was 2019. I have friends in the trade union movement and the government, and I would like to offer my unqualified support for the people resisting the fascist-led offensive on the contact lines in both Lugansk and Donetsk. George, I just really want to make 2 points, and I'll try and make them briefly. The first one is, I think what we're witnessing now is very reminiscent of the Iraq wars, because George Bush Sr., when he was elected American president, bombed Saddam Hussein's Iraqi army out of Kuwait. Now, it was claimed at the time that he stated he should have finished the job and followed Saddam Hussein further into Iraq. When his son was elected George Bush Jr., he then finished the job with, we all know, weapons of mass destruction and those lies that led to the illegal war on Iraq. Joe Biden was the vice president under Obama in 2014 when Victoria Nuland and the $5 billion helped to financially subsidize the fascist coup that led to the deposing of the democratically elected president of Ukraine at that time. It's funny, when Trump came to power, the temperature was turned down, although there's always been Ukrainian violations of the ceasefires with a heavy military shelling of especially the Republic of Donetsk, as the contact line is practically on the border of the city by 2 or 3 kilometers. Whenever Biden came into power in 2021, now we see those 90 tons of military hardware brought into Ukraine in preparation for the very offensive that we're witnessing today, along with Johnson and NATO sending troops, specialists, special ops, and technical advisors into the conflict zone. They've just recently signed off on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline between Russia and Germany, and I see the coincidence in the ratcheting up of the war rhetoric and indeed the violence on the contact line to be America using the Ukrainian people and the people of Donbass in its further war of isolating and marginalizing Russia by trying to force Germany to sign up to the sanctions which they want to impose because they're trying to claim Russia as the aggressor in this situation. I think this is all about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And finally, America is now selling more energy to Europe, just like your previous caller said with the liquid natural gas. It now sells more energy to Europe than Russia.
Well, yes, and more expensively and less dependably, and the pipeline cost tens of billions of euros to build. And who's going to bear the loss from that if it isn't going to actually be used? But you're right. It's about all of those things, but it's about something more. As we both know, the Iraq War was intended to demonstrate the overwhelming power of the United States and ended up actually proving the complete opposite. And when the US was run out of Afghanistan by fighters in sandals, riding bicycles, and had to steal away like a thief in the night, leaving behind it an untold fortune in weapons and ammunition and military installations, the humiliation of the United States was too much to bear. I think they thought they could get a cheap win out of the Ukrainian situation. I think they're going to find it won't be very cheap at all. Thanks, Fra, in Belfast. We've got the Russian ambassador to the UN coming up after the break.
Radio Sputnik News.
Her Majesty the Queen has tested positive for coronavirus. The 95-year-old monarch is experiencing mild cold-like symptoms and expects to continue light duties at Windsor this week, Buckingham Palace has said. She is understood to be triple vaccinated. The Queen was in direct contact with Prince Charles the week the heir to the throne tested positive for COVID a second time. His wife, the Duchess of Cornwall, was also diagnosed with the virus. Others at Windsor are also understood to have contracted COVID. The royal household has its own royal physicians, and the Queen's doctors will be on hand to take care and monitor her health. Professor Sir Hugh Thomas, head of the medical household and physician to the Queen, is expected to be in charge. Evidence suggests that Russia is planning, quote, the biggest war in Europe since 1945, Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said. This is denied by Russia. Johnson said in a BBC interview that all the signs are that the plan has already, in some senses, begun. He claimed intelligence suggests Russia intends to launch an invasion that will encircle the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Quote, people need to understand the sheer cost in human life that this could entail, he said. The Prime Minister was speaking from Munich, where world leaders are meeting for an annual security conference. Johnson warned that any conflict could be, quote, bloody and protracted, saying that Russian President Vladimir Putin was possibly thinking illogically about this and did not see the disaster ahead. He indicated that the UK and the US would bring further sanctions against Russia than have been suggested before, including stopping its companies trading in pounds and dollars, a move that he said would hit Russia very, very hard. Russia has repeatedly denied any intention to invade Ukraine. Boris Johnson has also refused to say whether he will resign if police found he had broken lockdown laws. The Prime Minister has returned his questionnaire to the Metropolitan Police, who are investigating Downing Street parties. Asked in a BBC interview whether he would resign if police decide to take action, Johnson said, I can't comment about a process that is underway. More than 50 people have been sent the document by the force. Downing Street has not revealed what Johnson said in his written response to the police, only that it was sent to them within the 7-day deadline before he travelled to Munich this weekend. Storm Franklin is forecast to hit the United Kingdom after Storm Eunice left 1.4 million homes without power. The Met Office has issued an amber wind warning for Northern Ireland from Monday morning and yellow ones for parts of the UK from Sunday. There is a yellow rain warning in the northwest of England, where 2 severe flood alerts indicate danger to life. This comes days after one of the worst storms in the UK in decades, in which 3 people died. More than 80,000 homes still have no power. Franklin is the 3rd storm to hit the UK in a week and follows the disruption from Storm Dudley and Storm Eunice. The Democratic Unionist Party politician Christopher Salford has died suddenly at the age of 39. Salford was a well-known member of the party and had represented South Belfast in the Northern Ireland Assembly since 2016. DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson said he was deeply saddened at Stolford's death. Sir Geoffrey said Mr Stolford was, quote, not just an elected representative or a colleague, he was a friend. Stolford is survived by his wife Laura and 4 children. One of the passengers missing aboard a ferry that caught fire near Greece on Friday has been found alive, authorities say. The Belarusian truck driver, aged 21, used a ladder to climb down from the ferry onto a tugboat. His first words were, "Tell me I'm alive." The driver told Greek media he had heard other voices on the ship. Rescuers have managed to board the ship to try and find the 11 others still missing. Greek broadcaster ERT reports the Italian-flagged Euroferry Olympia caught fire en route to the Italian port of Brindisi. More than 270 were rescued from the ship and taken to the island of Corfu. At the 4th attempt, after heartbreaking near misses and career-saving surgery on an arthritic hip, British curler Eve Muirhead finally has her Olympic gold medal. Quote, without these girls being so strong, this dream would not have come true, said Muirhead, who was in tears on the podium. Quote, they helped me to become a better curler and a better person. The Great Britain team of Muirhead, Vicky Wright, Jen Dodds and Hayley Duff overwhelmed Japan 10-3 in Sunday's final. The Beijing Winter Olympics came to a close on Sunday in a touching ceremony. Almost 3,000 athletes competed in 109 events across 15 disciplines during the past 2 weeks. International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach called for political leaders around the world to be inspired by the athletes' example of solidarity and peace. Quote, "This unifying power of the Olympic Games is stronger than the forces that want to divide us," he said. Bach also encouraged countries to continue vaccinating against COVID-19, saying, "If we want to finally overcome this pandemic, we must be faster," he said. Donald Trump's new social media venture called Truth Social will launch tomorrow, according to Reuters news agency. In a series of posts late on Friday, a verified account for the network's chief product officer, listed as Billy B, said, quote, "We are currently set up for release in the Apple App Store for Monday, February 21. If true, the launch would restore Trump's presence on social media more than a year after he was banned from Twitter, Facebook and YouTube following the January 6th attack on the US Capitol last year. He was accused of posting messages that incited violence. And finally, a helicopter which crashed into the ocean waters off Miami Beach miraculously avoided crowds of swimmers just feet away. Police said 2 people in the aircraft were taken to hospital and are both in a stable condition. The third passenger was not injured, Miami Beach police said. A video tweeted by the force showed the aircraft plunging into the water close to a busy area of beachgoers. Police said they received a call about the crash near 10th Street at 1:10 p.m. local time. That's 6 p.m. UK time on Saturday. Police closed off the beach in an area full of outdoor cafes, restaurants and shops. That's the latest. You're up to date. I'm Jamie Lowe, and the mother of all talk shows continues next.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway, only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, here's a funny thing. I'm supposed to be interviewing Dmitri Polyansky, the deputy Russian ambassador to the United Nations. He has retweeted that I am about to interview him, but somehow we're not able to connect on the telephone. Suspicious? Moi? All circuits are busy. An automated voice in Langley, Virginia is telling me. Not only that, our guest after him in China cannot currently be reached either. They say that the first casualty of war is truth. Johnny Dunleavy says Macron make good football jerseys. And Cher says the movement in Canada is amazing. Thank you, truckers and the people coming out in the cold to support freedom of choice. Trudeau is now the master of tyranny. And Aussie says Ghislaine still has the black book, but she needs to sing to stay alive. Does Bill Clinton sweat? You bet. And Gubarwala says Kim Iversen is one of my favorite independent thinkers. I'm really impressed by her, I must say. I thought she was an outstanding guest. I do hope that we can speak again. And Two's Time says, what is sad is that the workers in Canada have not been championed by the real left, but by the right. Still stand with the truckers, but so sad about the libtards. You and me both. And Graham Kirk says the Liberals have turned Canada into a fascist state. And Ash says, I listened to the Maxwell podcast. It was very good. Thanks very much, Ash. And Joseph K says, Maxwell grew up in Ukraine. So where did he get that crazy parody of a tough accent? Actually, Joe, he grew up in Ruthenia in what is now Slovakia. Colin says, nice plug on the Marks and Spencers and Levi's. Well, I was accused of wearing an implicitly expensive suit that didn't have a single crease in it, when in fact it's a Marks and Spencers jacket off the peg. And as always, I'm wearing black Levi 501s. It's the only jeans that actually exist. And Bunkunin says, I've heard you are homophobic and also hateful towards trans people, George. Is that true? I'll tell you what, Bun Kunin, why don't you call me on 08 081 96 5522. If you're lucky, I'll show you my Stonewall Award. Although it's 25 years old, right enough, when not many people were prepared to stand up for Stonewall. Sylvester is in Southampton. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Sylvester.
Hello.
Yes, welcome to the show.
Hello, Mr. George.
You're very welcome, sir. Go ahead.
Yes, this is my first time to actually give you a call, and I've been following your show now for quite a while. And I have one question to ask you, Mr. George.
Yes.
I've seen everybody talking about Ukraine, Russia, this invasion, whatever is taking place. And what I really wanted to find out is that I don't know what United States and NATO they're playing at. Going back to the 90s, when the Berlin Wall actually fell, actually there was an agreement, which what I can see in this my lifetime is that that agreement has been broken. And secondly, what I really wanted to find out is that it seems as if exactly during the Second World War, what took place was that Poland was being used as a launch pad. I'm very surprised to see that the United States and NATO, they're mobilizing troops in Poland. This is another reincarnation of history that is repeating itself. Because Poland, for what I know, got maybe, if I'm not mistaken, 5 or 6 concentration camps was built in Poland during Second World War. A lot of people were killed in that country.
Yes,
so
and a lot of Ukrainian people,
yes,
Jews and non-Jews, were sent there by the very people that we are now arming and funding in Ukraine. It's one of the great ironies of history. Sylvester, thanks. An excellent call. Don't be a stranger. Come back soon. But we've now got the ambassador. The interruption was merely temporary and I'm sure purely technical. He is Dmitri Polyansky, the Deputy Ambassador for Russia to the United Nations. Excellency, welcome to the show. Sorry we're a little late in getting to you. I wonder if we can start in what was breaking news at least an hour or so ago. May have been overtaken by events on the ground, but one understood from the breaking news about an hour or two ago that the government of France was seeking to broker a ceasefire followed by a summit at the highest level to save the peace in Europe. Are you able to tell us anything about that?
I think there was an official press release about this meeting on the website of President of Russia. And I know that there were speculations about something else, and they were not confirmed from our side. But indeed, France, as a member of Normandy Group, bears a special responsibility for the behavior of our Ukrainian neighbors. So if France has certain tools to influence them and to convince them that they should get in dialogue with their own citizens in the East, that would be a very good scenario.
I'm sure you were too busy to listen to my opening remarks, but included in them was quoting the head of the Moscow Bureau, whatever or wherever that is, of the Carnegie Foundation, that it's quite clear that these wicked Russians are seeking to coerce the government of Ukraine to implement the Minsk agreements. That's a very odd formulation, as one imagines that when one signs an agreement, there is no further need for coercion to implement it. And if there is, the co-signatories to it are the ones who should be doing the coercing.
Absolutely, but I don't think it's even okay to speak about any coercing. I think that implementing this agreement is in the best interest of Ukraine. If Ukraine wants to remain a sovereign country and in control of whatever happens on its territory, This was behind the Minsk agreements, and it is, as I already said, the backbone of this agreement is direct dialogue with the people in the East, because lack of this dialogue, ignorance of what they wanted after the illegal Maidan coup in 2014, was the core of all the problems that Ukraine faced immediately after Maidan, both with Crimea or with the east of Ukraine. Unless Ukraine engages in the dialogue, meaningful dialogue, unless Ukraine is ready to take everybody on board in one state and listen to their preoccupations, nothing good will happen for this country. That's why the Minsk agreements was designed. So I don't think anybody needs to coerce Ukraine in doing so. It's in the best interest of Ukrainians themselves.
Well, of course, dialogue and indeed recognition of the autonomy of the so-called people's republics in the east of the country is what the Minsk agreement was about. But it also required a ceasefire on the borderline and also the absence of foreign forces from the area, neither of which is happening. Now, I've just, during the break for the news, looked on social media. It appears that there is a major offensive now going on, launched by the government forces against the people of the Donbass and of the independent areas. Can you confirm that?
Well, we receive a lot of news, of course, about ongoing shelling and explosions on the territory of the the territory controlled by the republics. We also have our own sources of information. We have a lot of relatives and friends. They all say that the situation is very dangerous and precarious, and that the evacuation of peaceful population, primarily women, children, and elderly, is underway. A lot of them are leaving these territories. As for the men, they are joining as volunteers if they, of course, want to, the military detachments. So people there are absolutely ready to defend their land and to stop Ukraine from destroying it.
So what do you think the end game is? I've said from the beginning that Russia will not invade Ukraine, but Ukraine might very well invade the ethnically Russian population of the eastern part of their country. And if that happens, Russia will have no choice but to try to protect and save those people. You're speaking for a state, I'm speaking only for myself, but the pressure on Russia to defend its co-religionists, its compatriots, would be irresistible. It would be, ineluctably, that would happen, no?
Let's not engage in some kind of speculation, because I think that the people there during the 7 years of conflict, they have enough of resources to withstand Ukrainian attack on their own. Again, it's only hypothetical scenario, but they have accumulated enough of experience and training, combat agility to do so. So we'll see. But of course, the scenario that I described is very bad, and we would like to avoid this scenario. We hope that Ukraine will have enough common sense to remain within the framework of Minsk agreements, to agree to ceasefire, of course, and also to implement Minsk agreements, all the provisions you mentioned about autonomy, but it's not the autonomy, it's a special status of Donbass that should be implemented into Ukrainian legislation as one of the major moves on the way to implement Minsk agreements. Elections need to take place. And there are a lot of provisions in this document which are happening one after another. And the end result, if Ukraine does everything that it is written there, and the population of Donbass is agreeing with this, would be re-establishment of Ukrainian control over the border. But Ukrainians usually try to start from this last point, to put it on top of everything, saying that they need to control the border first and foremost. So this is a very complicated situation, and of course Ukraine makes it much more complicated and dangerous for everybody. And given the fact that our Western colleagues are trying to put a blind eye to what's happening in the East, they are from the outset denying that Ukraine is shelling these territories, implying that everything that is happening there would be the result of Russian provocation. Of course, with such an emboldening, it is very risky, and it is very possible that some people in Ukraine would have the temptation of provoking the rebels, provoking these territories, and we don't know what may be the consequences yet. So, if our French colleagues can influence the minds of Ukrainian establishment and to convince them that they should stick to Minsk agreements and that they should not open fire at peaceful populations in Donbass, that could be only welcome.
Now, this is all a very big tragedy for much of the life of the former Soviet Union. There were Ukrainians in the highest levels, including the highest level, not once but twice, in the leadership of the Soviet Union, Khrushchev and Brezhnev. And also, of course, the sacrifice made by the heroes in Ukraine as part of the Red Army, as part of the partisans behind the Nazi lines. Real heroism in the great patriotic war from Ukrainian people. Of course, there was collaboration, and there were Nazi sympathizers who quickly became Nazis as soon as they could. But the great majority of the Ukrainian people were a fraternal people of the Russians. I feel extremely sad about all of this. How has it felt in Russia?
I think it's even more sad for us to see what's happening. But the problem is that there is very loud and powerful minority in Ukraine that is now on the top of the country, and that dictates to the others the way that they should deal with the history issues, which is not shared by majority of population in Ukraine. That's quite clear. We see it from opinion polls. We see it from our contacts. We still have a lot of friends and relatives there in Ukraine. And they try to monopolize the public discourse in Ukraine about these issues. You may have known that 6 opposition channels have been shut down, and the key leader of the opposition is now under arrest. So apparently the repressions are very energetic now in Ukraine. So people are afraid. People are visibly afraid to speak out, to say things that they really feel, because this regime that came to power in 2014 has proved itself to be very bloody and very, very aggressive. It's enough to remember the tragedy in Odessa in 2014 when 40 people were burnt alive only for trying to make their point clear. Actually, Donbass is the best example of this, when people wanted to talk, people in the East, not only in these republics, but also in other southeast cities, wanted to discuss how they would live in one country with the people who came to power. But instead of speaking with them, these people came with arms and planes and shellings. And that's happening right now in other places. In some other places, people are maybe just waiting, intimidated, but well, they can't be, of course, happy about what's happening, not only in history terms, but also in the usage of Russian language, which is a native language, mother tongue to a big majority of Ukrainian population. But as you know, it is banned, and people are being fined for speaking Ukrainian, and the law that is in force already now is gradually making these fines more and more important. So all this atmosphere, of course, creates a situation when people in the West, I mean, in the Western countries, they simply do not understand what's happening in Ukraine, because they try to to pick up information from those who are in power, from the establishment, from those loud minority, much of which has been formed and financed by the West in the previous years before Maidan. But they don't know what really the population feels and what it really wants from all this situation. And the population is, of course, sick and tired of war. Population is sick and tired of these authorities that are banning everything that is dear to them. So I think that you need to take into consideration this picture when you analyze the situation in Ukraine. And this picture is absolutely obscure for our Western colleagues. They have in mind some kind of a modern, democratic, progressive country. They don't want to notice the corruption there. They don't want to notice the oligarchs. They don't want to notice all the things that I just mentioned to you. And maybe they prefer to be comfortably numb in this situation, but that doesn't change the deepness of the problems for our neighbors.
There's a few of them in the bank details of Credit Suisse, which has just broken here in England and repays some steady excellency. Now, the proximate reason for this crisis is Ukraine, but the Ukraine issue is located in the absolute failure to respect the security needs of Russia vis-a-vis NATO as a whole. And NATO is steadily recruiting and encroaching, getting ever closer, in fact, to Moscow. And the Russian government has said there are red lines here. And we have security demands that must be acknowledged and must be negotiated. So this is part of a bigger crisis. And that's why Britain and America and also some others are currently, right now, I mean, the German airspace is full of American planes. Right now, someone just told me, who's working in the German ministry concerned. This is all very alarming because that's not a local war in a part of Ukraine. That's a European war that is in danger of breaking out. A European war which could involve even the use of nuclear weapons. This is a deeply alarming prospect. Do you think any of the governments in Europe are alarmed, or is it just the people?
Well, I think they must be alarmed. They must be mindful of what's happening. But of course, they are having wrong perception of what you are telling. They think that Russia is trying to blackmail everybody and that Russia is trying to win some kind of points because of the situation. But of course, let's not take the hypothetical scenarios of European war. That's something that everybody wants to avoid. And I don't see at this point indications that could lead to this war, because we are all people of common sense in Russia and in Europe, and we all understand what is at stake here. But you're absolutely right that what's happening in Ukraine is an element of a much bigger picture. And our Western colleagues, sometimes they try to boil the situation down to the narrow issue of Ukraine, assuming that once the situation around Ukraine is resolved, then there will be no more problems in relations between Russia and the West. Ukraine is important. The crisis in Ukraine is very important for Russia and for Europe, but the picture is much bigger. And our colleagues, our neighbors in Europe should take a bigger and more in-depth optics, because indeed the Russian security concerns that we were voicing from the very beginning, it's not today that we started to voice them, are very legitimate. They also take into account the promises, the oral promises that were given to us during the period when Soviet Union ceased to exist, and there are a lot of confirmation of these oral promises, but unfortunately they were not put on the paper. It is also important to understand that we want good relations with our European colleagues. And we were from the very beginning, I'm not speaking about NATO now, I'm speaking about European Union rather. We were speaking from the beginning of the years 2000 about some kind of common spaces that could make our cooperation with European Union, and at that time we called each other strategic partners. There was such a time, and I was working in Brussels at this time. So we were thinking about some concept that would allow us to cooperate, to create a big common space from Lisbon to Vladivostok, and to cooperate to the benefit of all the participants within the framework of this space. And so one of the preconditions which we all shared, as we believed at this stage, was that we shouldn't put our common neighbors in the position of a choice between Russia and the European Union. And of course, Ukraine was first and foremost on our minds. So we kind of tried to promote this understanding. European Union was not against it in principle, but it never materialized in anything concrete. The common space of external security contained this norm, but it was not implemented in practice because European Union started to launch the policy, first the European neighborhood policy, which was more or less okay, but then Eastern Partnership, which absolutely went to another direction. And Eastern Partnership was exactly designed to build divisive walls in the European continent and to put our neighbors in the position of choice between Russia and the EU. So I think that when we take this, we try to analyze the situation, we should not concentrate only on the NATO policies. We should also think about EU policies. And this is something that should be changed in EU mentality in relations with Russia and in approaches to our common neighbors.
Excellency, thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Much obliged to you. Is it now time for Her Majesty the Queen to abdicate? Yes, 35. No, 65. Wow. But on YouTube, it's still yes, 59. No, 41. And yes, 59 on Telegram. Why the big difference between the votes on Twitter and the votes on YouTube and Telegram? That is very interesting indeed. Anyway, here's my break question, for which I'm very late. In 1996, the film Trainspotting was released. Who was the author of the book on which it was based? A. Val McDermid, B. Irvin Welsh, C. Denise Mina. Answer coming up shortly.
Yo, Mikey, what's happening? Joey! The usual? Sure. You looking fresh, man. You get a new haircut? Nah, brother. I just got that, scholarship from the College of Knowledge. Oh, you got into the University of the Airwaves? Sure did, brother. I got knowledge coming out of my ears. GG, man. He knows what's up. I knew there was something new about you. Yo, reckon you take me? Everyone is welcome, brother. Even from Jersey.
Breaking news, expert analysis, and exclusive stories, all in one place. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Global higher education with one of the world's best-known iconoclasts. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
And the answer is Irvin Welsh, of course. Now, we had Russia. Where else to go next but China? My next guest used to be a British police officer. As a matter of fact, on some of the demonstrations that I was on that got a little bit pushy-shovey, he was on the other side of the barricade. His name is Jerry Gray. He's a former UK police officer. He's now an expat in China, and he's a writer and speaker on the truth about China. Jerry Gray, welcome to the mother of all talk shows, where I know it's 4 o'clock in the morning for you, at least. So a special thanks for staying up late or getting up early to talk to us. The Winter Olympics came and went. The British got 2 medals, which is about as many headlines as the Games got. If there was anything negative to say in the British media about the Olympics. They would say it. If not, they completely ignored it. Are people sour in China about all the attempts that were made to spoil the Olympic Games?
Absolutely not. But first of all, thanks very much for having me on the show.
Welcome.
The general consensus of opinion inside of China is that everybody is happy. Everybody is very proud of what China has done. Beijing being the first city, the only city to hold both Winter and Summer Olympics. And the fact that so many Chinese ethnic athletes have taken part is a great sense of pride. As my wife, who is Chinese, said to me the other day, it doesn't matter where they're from. If they're Chinese, we're still proud of them. And the biggest thing, the biggest story of the Olympics was, of course, the Eileen or Gu Eiling story. And that, of course, has caused more consternation in the United States. But it's really not a big story. It's just a beef up. People often compete. Ben Alexander is a British-born skier competing for Jamaica. So this is nothing new. And I think the general sense of pride, and I think a lot of people misunderstand that about the Chinese. They are very, very proud of what their people are doing. Doesn't matter what flag they fly under. They are Chinese people.
Now there you are, former copper from the yard. You're now behind the bamboo curtain in a country rapidly achieving pariah status amongst the political class and the media. How are you coping with that, Jerry?
Well, personally, it doesn't affect me at all. As I say, the Chinese people are very pragmatic about it. They're wondering what's going on and wondering why. There used to be a great sense of envy, not jealousy. It wasn't a negative sense. It was they all wished they could have what America has and what the UK has, what Australia has. And now they're saying, well, we're better off here. There's no... Inside of China, we're not seeing any of the animosity that we're seeing outside of China. Yet we're seeing the news reports outside of China all reporting this great animosity of the Chinese people. I'm seeing none of it at all. There's certainly no, there's no harassment, there's no racism, there's nothing. In fact, it's the opposite. People keep asking me, what's going on? Why are the Western countries doing this? I'm dual citizen. I'm British and I'm Australian. I've lived many years in each country. And so people tend to ask me about both. You say, you're from Britain, aren't you? Why is Britain doing this to us? Or you're from Australia. Why is Australia doing this to us? And it's really a sense of confusion. And I just say it's not the people, it's the media. That's the problem, the media.
Well, up to a point. I mean, of course, the media plays a big role in it, and the politicians too. But we'd be fooling ourselves if we thought that the kind of racism that sees Chinese people or Chinese-looking people pushed onto the subway rails and assaulted on buses and even murdered in America isn't also, to a slightly lesser extent, happening in other countries, including here. My own wife is not Chinese, but she looks Chinese. She looks Chinese to the uneducated eye, and we've come across it here. So it works. Propaganda, they say advertising, people spend on advertising because it works. People spend on propaganda because it works.
Yeah, it's definitely the media is pushing that, and it is very, very much so certain politicians. I've noticed that in each of those three countries. In fact, there are 4 countries, and it's predominantly the 4 countries that are Murdoch press countries as well. The Australia, India, UK, USA. These 4 countries all seem to have a very, very similar problem in that the racism is becoming accepted almost. And then the headlines scream, you know, why is Asian hatred so high? But it's really all about the stories inside the headlines. You know, they're screaming that they don't want this to happen and then encouraging it almost through their words, through their articles. It is a big problem, and it is media controlled. It is politically. Some politicians are seeing this because the media are so very strong about the anti-Asian, anti-Chinese thing, that some politicians are jumping on that bandwagon and saying, well, I'm going to do this too. We're seeing it in Australia right now with a potential a lead up to an election in May. We don't know the election date yet, but we've already seen the opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, saying things such as, my stance on China is not much different to the current government stance. So whether that's politicking or whether that's his real position, I don't know. But the one thing that they're missing out on is that trade between the two countries is the highest it's ever been. So businesses aren't thinking this. The businesses are still running. And it's the same with the UK, the USA. Businesses are at their highest level. The British Chamber of Commerce is very active here in China. And so there's a lot going on in the business scene that the positive side of it is not being reported at all. And the fact is, if there were real serious problems, then your shelves would be empty, your wardrobes would be bare. I dare say your Marks and Spencers and your Levi's would still be available, but there wouldn't be a lot else there.
In fact, it's only a few years since the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, David Cameron and George Osborne, announced the beginning of a golden age in relations between Britain and China. Blimey, that didn't last long.
Well, they even drank beer in a pub with Xi Jinping. I'm not sure he got the taste for that, but yeah. Around about the same period of time, the Australian government was signing free trade agreements with China. So it really is, it's only 6 or 7 years since this complete turnaround. And you know, we talked about the Olympics, and this is the first time I've noticed, and I'm not sure if it happens in other Olympics, but it's the first time I've noticed so many political reporters as well as the sports reporters came to China. This is a very unusual thing, and now they're looking everywhere for stories about China, and it's mostly negative stories they're trying to find. There's nothing positive in the media, except if you look on social media, almost everything is positive. Great beds, great food, great accommodation, great people. The bubble was fantastic. There has been no outbreak of COVID, unlike in Tokyo, where they did have a bubble, but it was, as one, I think an Australian journalist described it, as a more relaxed bubble. But then they had a surge in COVID cases as soon as the Olympics was finishing. So obviously what China is doing it right for the people. Everyone is coming away happy. And the only ones who get a platform are the ones who are complaining. We've seen complaints about a steak that was overcooked. We've seen complaints about spaghetti with only one tomato. If this is the best they've got, then really China's doing quite all right. But what we're not seeing...
Who would go to China and order spaghetti?
Well, why not go to Beijing and order a duck? Of course, the obvious thing to come to China is not to sit in a 5-star hotel. I mean, the dystopian effect of a hazmat suited waiter pouring a German chilled wine in a 5-star hotel was a very odd image. I have to admit that was an odd image. But the guy who posted that image was an Australian journalist who'd flown over from Singapore and not entered a quarantine condition. So he was in the bubble, but the staff were not in that bubble. So the staff needed to be protected against people like him who've come from a place that has COVID and were not in quarantine. So this was the reason for that. It was a very strange situation. I noticed that there were a lot of complaints about their cocktails being made by robots, their beers being poured by hazmat. It seemed to be that they were getting a lot of drink and then writing a lot of stories.
Yeah, well, that's the Fleet Street way, as you may recall from your time in London. So what are you doing now?
I do remember Fleet Street.
What are you doing now, Jerry? How do you live? Are you enjoying it?
Yes, I enjoy it very much. China is a very, very welcoming place, and I would suggest once COVID is through that every single person who has any doubt whatsoever come and visit. I'm retired now. I'm 63 years old. The visa regulations for China say that we can't work here after we're 60 years of age. So I've retired. I'm I write a little bit. I don't make very much money out of writing because not many people publish me outside of China. You can get paid as little as 300 RMB or as much as 1,000 RMB, which is somewhere between 25 and 80 pounds for an article. So it's not a very great living. But I have a police pension from my days back in the force. So I get by on that. And we have quite a good lifestyle.
And are you in Beijing or further out?
No, I'm much further away. I'm a long, long way from Beijing. I'm very close to Macau. I'm in a place called Zhongshan, which is the home of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the first president and leader of the revolution back in the Qing dynasty. It's about 2,500 kilometers from Beijing.
Excellent. Well, I wish you all the best, you and your family. Keep on trucking.
Thank you very much.
And I hope we get to talk again. That's Jerry Gray, a former UK police officer, now living in China. In 1997, a sheep was cloned by scientists in Edinburgh. What was the sheep called? Dolly, Molly, or Egbert? Tell me after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
We asked you to help the podcast reach the magic number of 100 countries. I'm unusually proud of this, as you may be able to tell. And you answered the call. South Korea and Moldova took us over the hill, with the Moats podcast now downloaded in 101 countries. Little old us in 101 countries. So if you're not already listening to this genuinely worldwide sensation, then please subscribe so you can listen to Moats anywhere, anytime, from every corner of the earth. It's the distilled version of this show, shorn of all the peripheral material. Just pure Moats, 90 minutes instead of 3 hours. So if you do it and you love it, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And if you're a Spotify user, please follow us and let us see when the next record broken will be.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
And the sheep was Dolly, of course, although her sister was Molly and Egbert was her brother. Now, news from the podcasts this week. I can't believe I'm reading this. We've got new subscribers in Martinique, Fiji, Cambodia, Mauritius, and Georgia. That's not Georgia, USA, but Georgia in the Caucasus. And that means we now have subscribers in 130 countries. And we've been in the political top 10 in Russia, South Africa, Singapore, and the Philippines. Not a bad week. And this actually is because our Maxwell the Monster podcast was released on all of our podcast platforms after last week's show. Part 2 of it is being released when I push the button at the end of this show. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to Moats anytime, anywhere. And leave us, by the way, a 5-star review if you would. Here's one. I listen in from Saudi Arabia and play your podcast on the commute to and from daycare. Not sure what my 2-year-old gets out of it, but I certainly enjoy your perspective and the diversity of guests you have on. Thanks, Gigi. Thanks to you and to your 2-year-old for putting up with it. Let's go to the switchboard. Peter is in Canada, BC, British Columbia. Go ahead, Peter.
Good morning, George. Or should I say good afternoon?
Good. It's evening for us.
You betcha. It's just noon here. Anyways, I just caught you talking about Ukraine there a while ago, and I was just wondering about, how, I want to tell you, in British Columbia here and across Canada, our Prime Minister has announced that anybody that supports the truckers are fascists, Nazis, and the worst. And meanwhile, at the same time, he just shipped off $500 million to the Ukraine so they could support the government there, as well as a second shipment this month of weapons, apparently.
I'm applauding you, Peter, because that is such a screamingly obvious but ignored point. The truckers of his own country are fascists, while he's sending hundreds of millions to actual fascists, jackbooted, goose-stepping, swastika flying, SS insignia wearing.
You got it.
Ukrainian fascists of the Azov battalion. As a matter of fact, I have it on good authority that it was the Canadian Armed Forces that did most of the training of the Azov battalion. This is surreal. It's absolutely surreal, Peter.
We brag about that here on our local CBC station, that we're helping training and arm them against the ruthless Russians, of course. And, so we hear the story here, that side of the story here, but we don't hear the other side until we look to Jimmy Dore, you, and many others, Chris Hedges, for instance. These
thought he was
people...
a liberal, Peter. Thought this Trudeau was a liberal. Or is he, in fact, a liberal?
Well,
maybe that's what liberals actually really are.
No, George, I think that the man Jagmeet Singh, the man I voted for, the party that I voted for all my life. My grandfather was a CCFer. I met Tommy Douglas back in the day when I was just a child, as they chatted. And the CCF became the NDP. And I voted for them all my life. And for Jagmeet Singh to turn around, as well as Avi Lewis, the son of Stephen Lewis, calling us all fascists, that we were all those things that you just mentioned, is just shocking to many people here. And quite frankly, many people that have given money to this fund are living in great fear now. Their bank accounts are being seized, their life insurance policies are being canceled, and they're losing their jobs. So more people are going to be out of work soon, and I guess that's the way it works. When we want to concentrate things into the right hands, the visions of there's a gentleman that watches these events downtown in Ottawa. His name is.
Peter, what?
Yes, sir.
What could actually be more explicitly fascist than forcing people to take a medicine that they don't want to take?
Yes.
Seizing their bank accounts if they protest about it, trampling them underfoot by the Mounties, threatening to follow them home and hunt them down even if they leave the protest, slandering them as Nazis and fascists when all they're doing is expressing peacefully opposition to their government. What could be more fascist than that?
No, George, fascism is ripe and alive and large here in Canada, but there's a large population of protests running across Canada right now, from Victoria all the way to Newfoundland. There are truckers going on. I even seen a thing in Spain the other day where thousands of taxis were roaming through the streets honking their horns, And I've heard of other such freedom rides happening in other countries around the world, Australia, New Zealand, etc.
Peter, you've almost brought a tear to my eye. That's the call of the night. Thanks for that, Peter, in British Columbia, in Canada. Can we squeeze in Luke in the Wirral? Yeah, let's hear from Luke in the Wirral in England. Go ahead, Luke.
Okay, George, good to speak to you again.
And you?
Yeah, fantastic. What it is, we have witnessed to take a leaf out of your hat, we have witnessed a natural metamorphosis from a butterfly back into a slug.
Yeah.
And that would be the Labour Party turning into the Tory party, and both sort of entwining within one another. So now it's completely meaningless to anybody.
Yeah, it's two slugs mating, if that's not too repugnant an image. These two parties are one and the same now. You've heard my old one about two cheeks of the same backside, but they have congregated right in the center of that backside.
unfortunate because there's a lot of people that we need a lot of things to get done, and there's, all that they just seem to be arguing about masks and who got ripped off and who didn't get ripped off, and and who got away with things and who didn't get away with things. I mean, we need to get things done in this kingdom, and there's nobody, hardly anybody apart from yourself, and if you're not even in government. We need people to get things done here.
Yes. To what do you attribute all of this? How did the Labour Party go in such a short time, in such a dramatic about-face, that they are now indistinguishable from the Conservative Party, and both of them are, in fact, being run by Tony Blair?
I would say Tony Blair obviously completely destroyed the Labour Party. But anyway, let's even go further back. Let's go back to Neil Kinnock. Let's go back. You were around then, and you're older than me. But I tell you, I just remember the miners' strikes, and I remember all the steel industry going down, the fishing industry, everything, the manufacturing industry. And now look where we are now. It's all been privatized. Thank you, Margaret Thatcher. Where are you now? You're gone. Thank you, Ronald Reagan. You're gone. You deregulated all the banks, all the financial industry in London. Look where we are now, George. We're in a mess.
Yes, it's a sorry story, indeed. Thanks for making those points, Luke. Can I squeeze Lisa in Vancouver in now? Okay, Lisa in Vancouver in Canada, also in British Columbia. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hello, George. Thanks for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to make a couple of points about the Canadian Freedom Convoy and the narrative that the corporate media has been building.
Yeah.
I used to consider myself a left-wing progressive, and I usually vote for the Green Party or the NDP. But in this last election, I didn't vote for anyone because all of the political parties in Canada had a pro-mandate platform. So now I feel like a political atheist, and there is no party that represents me. I do support the truckers, and I support an end to all the mandates. But my issue is with the current narrative that the mainstream media has been putting out there, that the Freedom Convoy is all full of Trump supporters and right-wing racists. And I reject that characterization for a number of reasons. Trump isn't Canadian, and he has no place in Canadian politics. It's not a right or a left thing or a Trump or an anti-Trump. But if you wanted to go with that narrative, Trump was the administration that fast-tracked the vaccine. Trump was the one that bypassed the phase 3 trials for the emergency use authorization, and Trump was behind the lockdowns, the travel restrictions, and the mandates. So if you're pro-vaccine and pro-mandates, then you must be pro-Trump because you support those policies. And the freedom protesters are they're anti-Trump policies. So that narrative just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. As far as the racism goes, Trudeau took a knee with Black Lives Matter, and Black Lives Matter has said that the mandates are racist because they negatively affect the minority and poor communities the hardest. And the freedom protests are chock full of Chinese protesters because they left China to escape tyranny, and they don't want to see it creeping into the Canadian culture. So I reject that argument as well. And the other thing that people should know is that Canadians have been living under a tyranny of silence for 2 years now, where you're not allowed to speak out. We have a radio host on Z95.3. It's one of our major radio stations here in Vancouver. His name is Kid Carson, and at the moment he spoke out that he was anti-mandate, he was immediately fired. You're not allowed to speak out against mandates here, and doctors can't treat patients as they see fit. There's a proclamation went out that if doctors gave people medical exemptions against the vaccine, then every single exemption would be thoroughly scrutinized, and if it was deemed to be inappropriate, there would be consequences.
Well, Lisa, I need to stop you because I need to go to the news, but it was an extremely powerful call. Who would have thunk Canada would come to this? In the last hour, we're live in New York with RT America's Caleb Maupin. And then later, Mark Seddon, ex of the UN, on the Royals. And your calls and messages, too. Stay tuned. It's the news with Jamie Lowe.
Radio Sputnik News.
Her Majesty the Queen has tested positive for coronavirus. The 95-year-old monarch is experiencing mild cold-like symptoms and expects to continue light duties at Windsor this week, Buckingham Palace has said. She is understood to be triple vaccinated. The Queen was in direct contact with Prince Charles. The week the heir to the throne tested positive for COVID a second time. His wife, the Duchess of Cornwall, was also diagnosed with the virus. Others at Windsor are also understood to have contracted COVID. The royal household has its own royal physicians, and the Queen's doctors will be on hand to take care and monitor her health. Professor Sir Hugh Thomas, head of the medical household and physician to the Queen, is expected to be in charge. Evidence suggests that Russia is planning, quote, the biggest war in Europe since 1945, Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said. This is denied by Russia. Johnson said in a BBC interview that all the signs are that the plan has already, in some senses, begun. He claimed intelligence suggests Russia intends to launch an invasion that will encircle the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Quote, people need to understand the sheer cost in human life that this could entail, he said. The Prime Minister was speaking from Munich, where world leaders are meeting for an annual security conference. The conflict could be, quote, bloody and protracted. President Vladimir Putin was possibly thinking illogically about this and did not see the disaster ahead. He indicated that the UK and the US would bring further sanctions against Russia than have been suggested before, including stopping its companies trading in pounds and dollars, a move that he said would hit Russia very, very hard. Russia has repeatedly denied any intention to invade Ukraine. Boris Johnson has also refused to say whether he will resign if police found he had broken lockdown laws. The Prime Minister has returned his questionnaire to the Metropolitan Police, who are investigating Downing Street parties. Asked in a BBC interview whether he would resign if police decide to take action, Johnson said, I can't comment about a process that is underway. More than 50 people have been sent the document by the force. Downing Street has not revealed what Johnson said in his written response to the police, only that it was sent to them within the 7-day deadline before he travelled to Munich this weekend. To hit the United Kingdom after Storm Eunice left 1.4 million homes without power. The Met Office has issued an amber wind warning for Northern Ireland from Monday morning and yellow ones for parts of the UK from Sunday. There is a yellow rain warning in the northwest of England, where 2 severe flood alerts indicate danger to life. This comes days after one of the worst storms in the UK in decades, in which 3 people died. More than 80,000 homes still have no power. Franklin is the 3rd storm to hit the UK in a week and follows the disruption from Storm Dudley and Storm Eunice. The Democratic Unionist Party politician Christopher Salford has died suddenly at the age of 39. Salford was a well-known member of the party and had represented South Belfast in the Northern Ireland Assembly since 2016. DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson said he was deeply saddened at Salford's death. Sir Geoffrey said Mr Salford was, quote, not just an elected representative or a colleague, he was a friend. Salford is survived by his wife Laura and 4 children. One of the passengers missing aboard a ferry that caught fire near Greece on Friday has been found alive, authorities say. The Belarusian truck driver, aged 21, used a ladder to climb down from the ferry onto a tugboat. His first words were, "Tell me I'm alive." The driver told Greek media he had heard other voices on the ship. Rescuers have managed to board the ship to try and find the 11 others still missing. Greek broadcaster ERT reports the Italian-flagged Euroferry Olympia caught fire en route to the Italian port of Brindisi. More than 270 were rescued from the ship and taken to the island of Corfu. At the 4th attempt, after heartbreaking near misses and career-saving surgery on an arthritic hip, British curler Eve Muirhead finally has her Olympic gold medal. Quote, without these girls being so strong, this dream would not have come true, said Muirhead, who was in tears on the podium. Quote, they helped me to become a better curler and a better person. The Great Britain team of Muirhead, Vicky Wright, Jen Dodds and Hayley Duff overwhelmed Japan 10-3 in Sunday's final. The Beijing Winter Olympics came to a close on Sunday in a touching ceremony. Almost 3,000 athletes competed in 109 events across 15 disciplines during the past 2 weeks. International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach called for political leaders around the world to be inspired by the athletes' example of solidarity and peace. Quote, "This unifying power of the Olympic Games is stronger than the forces that want to divide us," he said. Bach also encouraged countries to continue vaccinating against COVID-19, saying, "If we want to finally overcome this pandemic, we must be faster," he said. Donald Trump's new social media venture called Truth Social will launch tomorrow, according to Reuters news agency. In a series of posts late on Friday, a verified account for the network's chief product officer, listed as Billy B, said, quote, "We are currently set up for release in the Apple App Store for Monday, February 21. If true, the launch would restore Trump's presence on social media more than a year after he was banned from Twitter, Facebook and YouTube following the January 6th attack on the US Capitol last year. He was accused of posting messages that incited violence. And finally, a helicopter which crashed into the ocean waters off Miami Beach miraculously avoided crowds of swimmers just feet away. Police said 2 people in the aircraft were taken to hospital and are both in a stable condition. The third passenger was not injured, Miami Beach police said. A video tweeted by the force showed the aircraft plunging into the water close to a busy area of beachgoers. Police said they received a call about the crash near 10th Street at 1:10 p.m. local time. That's 6 p.m. UK time on Saturday. Police closed off the beach in an area full of outdoor cafes, restaurants and shops. That's the latest. You're up to date. I'm Jamie Lowe, and the mother of all talk shows continues next.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway, only on Sputnik Radio.
And we've got a new poll. Are you concerned about all the headlines over Ukraine? A, it's horrific. B, don't care. C, no idea. On my YouTube and on my Telegram. One man who cares is my RT America colleague and the founder of the Center for Political Innovation, a brand new and extremely busy and extremely impressive political formation in America. They've got a very important conference coming up soon, and I'm going to speak to it by video because Caleb is not just any journalist. He's not just any broadcaster. He's a significant, though a young man, a significant political figure in America, and he's going to get much more significant yet. He joins me now, I hope, on the line. Caleb, thank you for joining us. Let's start with Ukraine. We might not even get past Ukraine. Someone told me from Germany, the German airports are full of American military aircraft. The skies above Germany are filled with American aircraft. The British airfields that you have been sending American warplanes out east for the last week or 10 days. Are we really seriously going into a European war?
Well, it's starting to look that way, and that's utterly terrifying. Because I would like to just frankly ask, what is there to gain for average American working families right now who are seeing the price of food skyrocket, who are facing an epidemic of opioids that are destroying the lives of their children, that are driving on roads that are crumbling? What in the world is there for America's working families to gain in some confrontation in Ukraine? Now, Joe Biden is telling us he won't send American troops to fight in Ukraine. But that's deceptive because there are already American National Guard training the Ukrainian military, and that includes that Azov battalion, that fascist formation that's part of the official Ukrainian military. What in the world are the people of the United States going to gain from some kind of head-on confrontation with a great power like Russia with a huge military? I mean, this is a disaster waiting to happen. Meanwhile, you look at home, the economy is crumbling. Inflation is through the roof. Americans are upset. They're angry. And Joe Biden wants to get us into a new war with Russia. This is insane.
It is. It qualifies as insane, especially as you lost the last war not 6 months ago at the hands of men on bicycles. What makes the American ruling elite think that they can fight the hypersonically nuclear superpower of Russia?
Sure. And also, let's look at the facts. You know, right now, Afghanistan, that had 20 years of U.S. occupation, that devastated the country, let the drug gangs and the terrorist groups get stronger. Now, the United States pulled out of Afghanistan, and it froze all of their funds. And right now, there is a crisis of malnutrition taking place in Afghanistan. So while there are people starving, the U.S. government has stolen all the funds of the Afghan government, frozen them, and now they're distributing it to the 9/11 families, even though the Afghan people had nothing to do with 9/11. The USA is committing a horrendous human rights violation, a horrendous atrocity, using hunger as a weapon of war, and to distract us, they want to focus on, oh, you know, Russia's going to invade Ukraine, be very afraid of Russia. Meanwhile, if you look at the details and if you look at U.S. media and how they're reporting on this, they are not in touch with reality. You know, the civilian areas of eastern Ukraine, the Donbass region, Donetsk, Luhansk, they have been shelled by the Ukrainian government. A number of civilians have been killed. Thousands of civilians have been killed since this conflict began in 2014 with Barack Obama overthrowing the Ukrainian government with Euromaidan. And a lot of civilians, but yet now that civilians are being evacuated from eastern Ukraine in the aftermath of the explosions that happened on Friday, the U.S. media is making it sound like it's a crazy allegation that the Ukrainian government would never do this. They have been doing it. They have killed civilians. They have a monument specifically to the children who have been killed since this conflict began. The peoples of Donbass, Donetsk, Luhansk, Odessa, they have suffered since this conflict has began. They have been persecuted. They have been hit with drones. There are Turkish drones that the Kiev government has purchased from Erdogan that they've been using and attacking eastern Ukraine. And the people in eastern Ukraine are worried about their own safety, and they're fleeing and they're evacuating. And U.S. media makes it sound like there's nothing for them to be afraid of. They're not paying attention to what's actually happened in Ukraine since 2014. They're just kind of glossing all of this over, making it sound like Russia is somehow the one we should all be afraid of.
Well, some of the most eminent journalistic figures in this country are saying exactly the same thing. Now, given that I know that they are not fools, that means that they are knaves, that they are lying. They absolutely know that thousands of civilians have been killed in that very place between 2014 and now. They also know that the massed battalions, including the fascist Azov battalion, are right now on the line of control and are right now firing shells from cannon and mortar. They know that because they're not fools. And they only have to go on social media. They can see it with their own eyes, but they are denying it, which makes them liars from my point of view, rather than fools. I'm not sure which actually would be worse in our fellow journalists. But it's beginning, I mean, I agree with the word you used right at the beginning. It's beginning to look rather like there's going to be a war.
Yes, and it's terrifying. I think people don't seem to understand what this means. You know, during the Cold War, there was understanding that if the USA and the Soviet Union faced off, that might end the human race. And when things started to look like they were moving toward war, you would have voices on the media, the mainstream networks in the United States, who would get on there and say, "Ooh, let's slow this down here. This is dangerous. This could end the world." You know, there was an understanding that a standoff with the United States and the Soviet Union was not good. But if you turn on mainstream networks in the United States, you don't hear that. You hear almost the mainstream networks are egging Biden on. They want him to attack Ukraine. He's he's not doing enough. They want him to get into a confrontation with Russia. They are kind of demanding that he be hostile and warlike against a very powerful country called Russia with a very strong military. It's very bizarre. There's such a gap between how average working class Americans feel in their bones and what they are seeing on the TV networks. The voices of the mainstream, they don't represent what average Americans feel. Look at all the support here in the United States for that trucker convoy in Canada. All this support is pouring in. So many working class Americans are with those truckers against the mandates, against the big corporations. They're with them. But mainstream media in the United States is almost completely unified in opposition to the truckers. And that shows you there's a gap. There is a very, very big gap. Average Americans know in their bones that the government is working for somebody other than them. This is supposed to be a democracy, but it seems like a lot of big corporations, a lot of banks, a lot of military contractors, a lot of natural gas and oil companies, they have the influence, and they seem to have forgotten about average Americans. Average working class Americans don't seem to be a priority. Their lives are getting worse. They are not interested in new wars, but yet our government is moving in a very, very different direction.
Isn't your government supposed to be, I know these terms are relative and perhaps more fluid than they have ever been, but wasn't the choice between Donald Trump, the right-wing candidate, and Joe Biden, the left-wing candidate? Aren't the Democrats supposed to be the left? Aren't these great media houses traditionally thought to be liberal? And yet, they're the people that may very well be dragging us into war.
Well, sure. I mean, we've seen kind of a flip in the U.S. Political spectrum. It seems like now the voices that are more skeptical of the establishment are coming from the right, whereas liberalism, and the Democratic Party have just kind of become the enforcers of the status quo. And that is a very interesting development we've seen. It used to be the Democrats were the ones that wanted to negotiate, that were less hawkish, but things have really kind of shifted, and it's on the right that we're seeing some criticism of Joe Biden and his escalation with Russia. Now, the right seems to be more focused on hostility toward China, so it's almost a matter of taste. But, on the right, you get more people that are criticizing this, whereas a lot of the liberals just line up behind Joe Biden. However, I will say that among the Bernie Sanders camp, there are a lot of folks in the Bernie Sanders camp who really did believe what Bernie Sanders said, and really, really do believe in peace and jobs and democracy and equality. And a lot of them are speaking up against their own party, and they've gotten ostracized for doing so. U.S. politics is in a very, very odd situation right now. I mean, Joe Biden came in and he was supposed to rescue the country from the disaster of Donald Trump, all the nightmare of the pandemic and, instability and rioting. And Joe Biden was supposed to bring the country back together. He's done the opposite. Polls show that the country is more polarized than when Donald Trump was in office. There are deeper divisions among the public than there were before. The economy is doing worse. COVID deaths have increased. Joe Biden has really failed to live up to the American people's expectations in so many ways. And then that raises the question, are we expecting a sweep by Republicans in the midterms coming up? Should we expect Donald Trump to get reelected? Will he be like Grover Cleveland and serve non-consecutive terms, right? Get voted out of office and then get voted back in. We'll have to see, because the Joe Biden, moment of clarity, he was going to save the whole country. We were going to get out of the nightmare of Donald Trump. It hasn't materialized, I'll tell you that much.
I find it difficult to believe he's running your great country. This great country, this industrial powerhouse, this can-do country, the richest, most powerful country in the world, with all its technological and cultural achievements. I look at Joe Biden now. I wouldn't send him out for a loaf, Caleb. I wouldn't let him play with his coat button, never mind a nuclear button. I'm finding it hard to believe he's in charge of events.
Sure. Well, the fact that he doesn't know what "Let's Go Brandon" means, right? That's the meme that's caught on in the United States by his detractors, that he's demonstrated he has no idea what that even means. He's the president of the United States. There's people who don't like him, and they've rallied around this joking meme, "Let's Go Brandon." He's never heard it. He doesn't even know what it means. That shows you he is not really in touch with things. He lives in a presidential bubble. And there are people in that bubble feeding him information and telling him what they want to hear and directing his every move. And every so often it gets almost embarrassing. He'll say something like, well, now they want me to go here, or now they want me to go there. Oh, they're telling me to go. I mean, it's almost like he's making it obvious that he's a puppet of somebody else. It's a little bit disturbing and scary. And the craziest thing is that, you know, his vice president, Kamala Harris, she's even less popular than he is. You know, I mean, people don't like Joe Biden. His poll numbers are low, but Kamala Harris scares even some of Biden's supporters. You know, they talked about how the White House just couldn't stand the staffers of the vice president, and that people are quitting Kamala Harris's staff in droves because they don't want to be known as Harris people, and that she has a very bad reputation on Capitol Hill. Polls show that Kamala Harris is even less popular than Joe Biden is. So it's a bizarre situation with everything that went wrong in the Trump years and all that. You'd think that the Democratic Party would take this moment to shine and walk through and become popular and fix the country. They seem to have made things worse and worse and worse. They don't know what they stand for. They're trying to please about 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 big different factions among our elite. They don't even know quite what they're doing. Meanwhile, the situation in the country is getting worse, and this international situation is also getting very, very scary and dangerous. I mean, this idea of a war with Russia, this is not a war you can fight with drones. I mean, this is not something that you sit down and talk about it over coffee. I mean, this is a serious situation, and you'd think mainstream media would be at least alerting people and trying to prep them for how serious this is going to be. They're not doing that. Mainstream media seems to think, oh, great, war with Russia. Let's escalate with Russia. Tension, that's great. I'm shocked. I'm utterly shocked at seeing how ridiculously pro-war mainstream media is.
Same here. I told you he was good, didn't I? Caleb Maupin, thanks very much for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Let me take some calls, can I? Cornelius in Swansea. He's an interesting fella. Go ahead, Cornelius.
Evening, George.
Evening.
I always look forward to the beginning of each show, right? Because your first 10 minutes, right, is so explosive, right? It's absolutely class. I really loved it. You had an independent American female journalist on earlier on.
Kim Iversen, yeah. Did you like her?
Yeah. Yeah, but I got lost a little bit when she started bringing in Donald Trump in relation to what the vaccine situation is in Canada. What's it to do with Donald Trump?
I think she was making the point that if it was her that was making it, may have been a caller earlier. The point is that the truckers are being accused of being a front for Donald Trump, of having been financed by the Trump movement. That's what she was saying.
Yeah, but I listened to, for instance, when Trump was doing his rallies to get reinstated as the president, which he lost. And he always advocated that the ones that I listened to, that he was for the vaccine, but he said it's up to the public if they want to take it or not.
I'm for the vaccine. I'm triple vaccinated. I'm against forcing people to take medicine. It cries out against everything I have always believed in. And I cannot believe the people I used to politically travel with now think that's okay. Now think it's all right to forcibly inject someone with medicine. When did this begin? When did this begin?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. But one little point I'd like to make, if you don't mind, is that when the media in the UK started talking about the Omicron virus and they interviewed specialists from South Africa and they said, yes, it was contagious, but it was a minor illness, right? The government can only respond to what they call the R rate is within the community. And if the infection is supposed to be a mild infection, why was there so many people running to get a test done over a cough or a runny nose? Is our country become full of hypochondriacs?
Not hypochondriacs, but there was a big sense of fear in the country, and it was deliberately engendered. You heard it here. On this very show, I said that Omicron was the variant that we've been waiting for. That Omicron would herald the end of the pandemic. And therefore, far from being a reason for locking down still further, it was going to lead to the end of the whole thing. And I was right in what I said, and I based it on the South African experience. Now, if I could do that, and I didn't even go to university, Cornelius, never mind, am I not a doctor? If I could work that out, how come the educated idiots that rule us and write our newspapers and work our TV, how come they didn't know that?
Yes, I agree with everything you're saying, George, right? But I listen so often, obviously, since this pandemic started, and everybody in the UK obviously have listened to the debates, and it's gone on for so long. But since the Omicron came out, the government can only respond to the infection rate within the community, and they only know what the infection rate in the community is by the R rate, by the amount of people getting tested.
Yeah, but that's all coming to an end now.
George.
It's all coming to an end, Cornelius.
Yeah, but the public are the ones that are rushing to get a test over a minor illness.
Well, look,
it's the public that's creating the issues.
Well, it's a dialectic, isn't it? The state and its media generate the hype, and the public, most of them respond. But we can't go on spending £2 billion a week testing. Labour thinks we should. Boris Johnson says we won't. And he's going to announce tomorrow, more or less, the end of the emergency.
Right, and is that a good thing in relation
to what's going
on in Canada?
It's a good thing. It's not often I can say about Boris Johnson, but he's doing the right thing on this. Cornelius, I need to go on because I've got 100 people trying to get through. Shreram is in London. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, George. It's been a while. We haven't spoken in a long time.
Did I pronounce your name properly?
Yes, you did.
Thank you.
We've done many shows together. Couple of things I want to cover off. First and foremost, and probably the most important one, is the Russia-Ukraine crisis.
Yes.
And I think it's a crisis of the media's making. The Minsk agreement needs to be implemented in letter and in spirit. That's all that Russia is asking for. It's one that was agreed upon by all the world powers, and one that they're saying should be implemented. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I'm old enough to remember the breakup of the Soviet Union, and I very distinctly recall the line being mentioned by James Baker, who was the then Foreign Secretary, and Lawrence Eagleberger, who became the Foreign Secretary after that, and then Douglas Hurd, that NATO would not expand to Russia's borders. Now, these are things that were promised a long time ago.
They were promised. The problem is, Shreram, that they were promised verbally. They're written down in notes and minutes and James Baker's voluminous memoirs. But, the idiot Gorbachev didn't get them in writing. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that. But for me, but for me, it was an act of supreme idiocy not to get that in writing.
I agree, 100%. And I think more than that, there were quite a few mistakes that were made at the time, but mostly by Gorbachev, in my opinion, because I think he let the Soviet Union disintegrate too easily. But I think Russia is not the Russia of the 90s today. Right? Whether you hate Putin or not, or you love him, what he's doing for his people is what the people of Russia believe is the best thing.
It's phenomenal. He's rebuilt Russia. I wouldn't vote for him. I'd have voted for someone else in the presidential election. But no one can dispute that Putin has completely dragged Russia off the floor and rebuilt it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be bothering with it, would they? They'd still be picking its pocket.
Exactly. I mean, I think the point is he's established organic institutions within Russia, and the plan of the West was to send in the scroungers, the corporations, the Western corporations, to go in there and impoverish the Russians and take their wealth away.
Yeah, and before Putin, that's exactly what they were doing.
Exactly. And I think the people of, especially the English-speaking world, are not being told the consequences of what this would do. The oil price would go up to $200+ a barrel easily. And this is not me saying it. These are some experts who are concerned about the situation saying it. $200 a barrel. We are struggling now. The normal white-collar workers are struggling at the moment. Imagine what's going to happen if oil hits $200 a barrel.
Doctor, you're a very, very clever man. Thank you very much for the call. Are you concerned about all the headlines over Ukraine? A, it's horrific. B, don't care. C, no idea. My last question of the evening. In this week, in 2008, Fidel Castro retired as president of Cuba due to ill health after almost 50 years. What is his brother called? What's his son called? What is his brother called? A, Raul, B, Miguel, C, Manuel. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Yeah, hi, George. The deep state, we mentioned it before. So rather than fear-mongering that everything that's going on at the moment with the COVID, the wars, blah, 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 why aren't we all addressing the deep state rather than this fear-mongering that's going over and over again?
How do you address it?
What I'm trying to get across, and hopefully your listeners will understand this, there is a deep state at work, and you know that.
Everybody knows that. That's a statement of the bleeding obvious.
So let's do something about that. Rather than ratting and rolling about the...
Give us a lead. Be our leader. Be our leader, Del.
Who are the deep states?
Yeah.
Oh, what a brilliant question. Those that are all over us. And what should we do about them? We should make them accountable.
I'm just trying to work out whether you're in the territory of shape-shifting lizards or you're talking about MI5 and MI6.
Please don't turn it into a circus, George. You know full well what's going on, and please don't
I do. I'm just struggling to get from you what it is we should be doing about them. What should I do about MI5 and MI6? And how should I do it?
Just stand up and go, there's something inherently wrong here. And
there's something really wrong here. There you are. I've sorted it, Del. Thanks for the call.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And the answer is Justin Castro. Raul Castro, of course, was his brother. Are you concerned about the headlines over Ukraine? You've got, 25 minutes to vote on that poll, either on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube channel, or on my Telegram channel. My final guest for the evening is a very old friend of mine. We've travelled to many hot spots together. War zones, in fact. He has been everything. He's been amazing. A Labour National Executive Committee member, a Labour parliamentary candidate, the editor of the socialist newspaper Tribune, but he also ended up as the speechwriter to the Secretary General of the United Nations. His name, of course, is Mark Seddon, and he joins us now. Mark, thanks very much for doing so. We've been to a few war zones, but there might not be any chance to go to the war zone in the Ukraine. It might just be volcanic ash.
Well, here's hoping not. Quite obviously, nobody wants a war. Nobody wants a war. And I think, the efforts that President Macron, one of the European leaders who has been acting in a more serious way in comparison to our own here, is obviously making some major efforts to try and get these serious discussions underway again. I mean, I was interested to see today that reality has also dawned on the president of Ukraine, that the diplomatic way is the best way. And I have to say that, the reality is we know that when the Berlin Wall fell, the promise was made not an inch eastwards, and that was NATO expansion. And that promise was made by Chancellor Kohl, by Herr Genscher, by Secretary of State Baker. I'm sure you discussed it this evening. This is key to the whole issue. Ukraine, as do sensible people throughout the world, know that this crisis could end if essentially Ukraine says, we don't want to join NATO. Lots of people say, oh, but it's their absolute right to join NATO. Well, it's also our right elsewhere in the world to say, look, let's be realistic. The United States would never tolerate missiles on Cuba. It didn't. It would never tolerate Mexico with Russian troops on it. No, so Russia is not going to tolerate NATO expansion into Ukraine. And it seems quite extraordinary that, I don't know, that there's almost the lack of seriousness that we see, especially in sections of the media in the West, almost willing something on. And of course, some of the dangerous brinkmanship being played by President Putin too. That everybody's got to step back from this. It would be absolutely crazy. George, Ukraine, sadly, tragically, is often referred to as the Eastern Bloodlands for good reason. This is a highly complex part of the world. And it's an area of the world that really, yet more conflict, because people forget conflict has been going on for over 8 years. And yet there we have in this Minsk agreement, the basics everybody knows for a permanent peace. But it's also got to be a peace that recognizes that, Ukrainians want to go into different directions, maybe, as they may well do in this country too. So, we just got to hope that...
Well, you say, Mark, that nobody wants war, but I think Boris Johnson wants war, and Keir Starmer is bolted up to his backside. So there's two people that want war.
Well,
Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer want war.
I'm talking about the peoples of the world who matter. They do not want war. And you see, the other thing is, it's absolutely clear, international law does mean that you do not invade other countries. Now, of course, no invasion has happened of Ukraine yet, but parts of Israel has been an occupation of parts of Palestine for over 50 years. And nobody's making a fuss about that. So, look, the thing is, most people do not want war. I'm sure that the Prime Minister, I think Boris Johnson is deeply out of his depth on this, for what it's worth. I also think Keir Starmer is as well. I think they're blundering about. They're extras. They're not taken seriously. And frankly, when a British Prime Minister can dispatch a Foreign Secretary who appeared to be more interested in having pictures taken of her parading around in a fur hat in quite warm weather in Moscow, and didn't even know that Rostov is in Russia and not Ukraine, you really have to wonder about these people. But it's kind of look, I don't think there's going to be, my own view is I don't think that realistically there's going to be any NATO involvement in Ukraine. There can't be. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. There's going to be an awful lot of, there's been a great deal of bluster, frankly, from the Prime Minister, who's not taking this as seriously as other European leaders are. Does he want a war? I'm sure he probably doesn't want a war, but he certainly would rather have this and these sorts of issues being talked about than his own behaviour.
Yes, talking of behaviour, we've only got time to deal with one. You know New York very well. You worked there at the United Nations for several years. You taught there in the university. What do you make of the Prince Andrew situation where he's paid 12 million quid to a woman he says he's never met?
Yeah, well, it does seem very, very strange that. I mean, there's this an extraordinary situation in this country right now whereby you have not only the government and the police, the Metropolitan Police and the royal family facing a whole wave of separate scandals. It's not just Prince Andrew who's currently under the spotlight, but also Prince Charles too. Now, maybe not so directly, of course, in his case with this Cash for Honours investigation that's taking place. But with the issue of Prince Andrew, a truly extraordinary situation which has been allowed to fester for a very long time, as we all know. I mean, we also remember Prince Andrew as Randy Andy, as the international jet setter, as the Air Miles Andy. Essentially, a lack of accountability over some members of the royal family. It's serious because obviously the Queen is the head of state of Britain. She's also head of state of 15 other Commonwealth countries to boot. It's not just about Britain. Now, of course, she's not under the spotlight, but she does appear to have been rather trusting of what her son has been saying to her all of these years. So there's poor judgment there too, possibly.
Mark Seddon, always a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us. I've got to get to Ottawa, where Paul is on the line. Just been to a trucker protest. Go ahead, Paul.
Hello, George. Thanks for having me again.
Welcome. Go ahead.
So I live in Ottawa, and the other two callers from BC, God love them, finally the people are speaking on, so I don't need to go down that road, what they said. But if you haven't heard them, go listen back to it. It's very important. So being from Ottawa, I can tell you that everybody gets a paycheck. Most people get their paycheck from the government. So the compliance here is very, very strong. So they didn't get a whole lot of local support. And I understand that because those horns were blaring loud. It was a sight to behold. So, and here, and watching people dancing in the streets. And
funny thing is, where are the left? I'll tell you where they are. They're neither organizing anti-war trucker convoys, and they're trashing and slandering the people who have gotten a convoy up because they don't quite like the cut of their jib. That's weird, isn't it?
I think, I just think of the people of the trucker convoys, the poor dears, they're complaining about having to have jobs. Not all of them, just the ones in certain professions and occupations. And yet the other stuff that the government is doing, far worse.
Consciousness is quite uneven. Yeah, quickly.
But the Omicron thing, you said basically, my understanding was you said basically it's over. And actually, it's not, because Omicron is still COVID-19 and is transmissible, and it can mutate into more dangerous variants.
It's over here, mate.
The more people who have it, the more...
It's over here. Boris Johnson's calling it off tomorrow.
Well, that might be for political reasons. I don't know.
I think it's the right thing to do. Anyway, what's a man with an accent like yours doing in Texas?
Oh, that's too long a story, George. You haven't got time.
Okay. Thanks, Dennis. Mark in Lancashire on Biden. Hunter Biden. Go ahead, Mark.
Sort of like interests of Mr. Biden and his son Hunter in Burisma.
Plenty of interests. Plenty and plenty and plenty of interests.
I mean, nobody mentions this because when it all came out, the New York Times just cut it down and it disappeared. But it's something that we should really talk about.
Oh, well, it was banned by all social media in the run-up to the presidential election. They called it Russian disinformation, but it was all true.
You can't talk the truth anymore, you know that.
It's all true, but they literally wiped it from the face of the internet.
But now we're starting a war with Russia, but Mr. Biden's got financial dealings with the Ukraine.
Exactly. We're starting a war with Russia over Ukraine, where the president's son has earned scores of millions of pounds for doing precious little.
Well, actually, I mean, we've seen what he did on the laptop. I'm not going to get into it.
No, we better not get into that. Mark, thanks for the call, my friend. Okay, the poll's almost closed. 51% of you think the headlines about Ukraine are horrific. 35% of you don't care. Don't care. And 14% of you really don't understand it at all. So that's the case on Twitter. On YouTube, 71% think it's horrific, 18% don't care, 11% don't know. And on Telegram, 73% think it's horrific and 22% don't. And 5% only don't know. Let's go to another call. David is in New York. Go ahead, David.
Echoes a little bit something you said a few minutes ago, but as regard to the Ukraine situation,
yeah,
where are the anti-war voices in the U.S.?
Exactly. Where are they? Where are they in England? Where?
My sense is that those in the U.S. who would otherwise be vocally anti-war are afraid to be labeled as Russian propagandists or worse. For example, let's take an example. We might have expected the progressive wing of the Democratic Party to have more of an anti-war perspective. But where is Bernie Sanders in this? Where is AOC? As far as I know, the only prominent Democratic Party politician who is vocally anti-war is Tulsi Gabbard. That's my point.
And I saw her statement in the week. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. She went up considerably in my estimation. But let's analyze this situation, David. Jane Fonda was accused of being Hanoi Jane because she opposed the bombing of North Vietnam. But everybody now knows that she was right and the US government at the time was wrong. People called me the Member of Parliament for Baghdad West in the run-up to and the course of the Iraq War. But everybody now knows I was right. And the people who launched the war were either idiots or criminals or both. So it's nothing new to be calumnized, anathematized as an agent of Russia or whatever. You've got to do what's right. And as Caleb Maupin, I thought with tremendously sincere indignation earlier, showed you all the reasons why everybody should be out saying no, no, no.
I agree with you completely. I'd like to make one more point, a slightly different point. But Biden, I think, has come to the conclusion that he's no good on domestic policy. He's failed on every promise he made, and he's basically backing off from that completely. And he's going back to what he thinks is his strength, which is foreign policy. But that's an illusion.
Thank you for that. My mother has just texted me that our show has been cut off. Let me know if that's true or not. Michael in Minneapolis up next. It's not been cut off in Minneapolis. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, George. Good to talk to you.
And you, sir.
So I thought you made a really good point earlier, or talking about how the authoritarian nature of government used to be thought of as a conservative thing, but we know that in the United States that's been fully bipartisan. Since I'm old enough to, remember Bush brutalizing protesters after 9/11, putting the mass security state in place, protesters getting brutalized, their heads cracked in by Obama at Occupy Wall Street. And I myself was once severely beaten by the Minneapolis police while protesting Karl Rove, but that's a story for another time. But freezing the bank accounts of protesters like Trudeau is doing in Canada and publicly outing people who donated to them and the media being fully complicit in this, that's terrifying, George.
It's
so I
extraordinary,
wonder,
absolutely extraordinary. How anyone, let alone someone calling themselves a liberal, could possibly countenance that.
It's absolutely, it's horrifying. And so I guess my question for you is, now that Trudeau has set the precedent, remember, Trudeau was letting this go before Joe Biden gave him a call because it was hurting trade coming into the U.S. And he said, hey, you got to get this under control because it's hurting the economy. So now that we've seen this precedent set, do you anticipate, you know, the United States under Biden or the UK under Boris Johnson of using these same kind of strong-arm tactics, freezing people's bank accounts, doxing them publicly? And if so, how do we prepare for that or combat that?
It is. It's almost unbelievable that we're having this conversation for a start.
Yeah.
You know, if someone, what's the modern phrase, doxes someone on Twitter, all the liberals are throwing their hands up in the air and yet applauding the publication from a hack of the names and addresses of people who made a donation for a perfectly legal protest. And now, if you're in Canada, measures are going to be taken against you.
I mean, George, there's a woman who got a call from the Washington Post who gave $40. And they said, how could you justify giving $40 to these agitators? And I'm like, so not only have they criminalized protests, which has fully been done in the United States, and I saw that at BLM and the way the police treated us more often than not, and in protests going back all the way to Occupy. But if they're gonna debank you, they're gonna make it so you don't have any financial power. I mean, that's a police state, George. It's
a police state. Michael, thanks for that great call. There's a legend on the line. Clear the decks. It's Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. It's very informative and worrying show tonight.
Thank you.
But I've got 2 points. They're not really relevant to the show, but I thought you'd like
That's all right.
to know.
Anything you have to say is welcome here.
One's good news and one's a point of concern, basically.
Mm-hmm.
The good news is I wanted to tell you about my great niece. She's been appointed Sweden's first is a mouthful, this. First ombudsman against the commercial sexual exploitation of children.
Wow.
And
Sweden's?
Yeah, the
Wow.
first one. She's 23 years old, that's all. And it's a big honor and a big job because it's against the commercial sexual exploitation of children.
Yeah.
And so we're very proud of her.
You should be. You should be. Give her our congratulations, please, from everyone connected to the show.
Well, her name is Gabriella Carnicle-Wolf.
I didn't know if you wanted to give her name, but I was tempted to ask you. Say the name again, please.
Gabriella Carnicle-Wolf. It's because she's got a Swedish mum.
Salute to her and the very best of fortune in smoking out these filthy traffickers and exploiters of children and young women and young men, for that matter. So I wish her every power to her elbow.
Thank you, George. The other point, which is concerning me, now, I watched the women's tennis final in Dubai yesterday, and they had a presentation ceremony, obviously. Now, Princess Latifa, she, you know, is the daughter of the ruler, presented the cups. And, you know, she didn't look well. She had no animation in her face. And we know that her father, bin Rashid Maktoum, he's had a bad reputation. And Latifa, she fled, didn't she? She fled.
Yeah, they say so, yeah. I mean, the government there deny it, but
Oh, she did,
it's pretty obvious that she did flee, yeah.
Yeah, well, she was found in going over to America, and she was told she was brought back. She just wanted her freedom.
Yeah.
But when I saw her presenting the prizes, she looked awful, and I just wondered if anybody had an update on if she's happy now.
I don't myself, but everyone who's watching and listening, if anyone can update us on the situation with Princess Latifa, we'd be grateful. You'll have to do it on Twitter now, though, because we've run out of time. Thanks, Norma, for that. I apologize about the loss of transmission, which seems to have affected our Facebook, which actually finished prematurely. I hope this is not the beginning of something bad, but remember this. Follow me on Telegram. On my Telegram channel, you will always be able to find me. Whatever anybody does, if anybody tries to close us down or deplatform us, we will always be on Telegram. It's t.me/George Galloway. Please do that tonight. Now, here, I've got this. Okay, Maxwell the Monster is now available on Patreon in full. But tonight, I'm pressing the button on episode 2 of the podcast. You can now listen to the first 2 podcasts on Spotify, Apple Music, and Deezer, or from wherever you get your podcasts from. So, I'm sorry about that. YouTube is back, Twitter is back, but the Facebook stream has ended, and we're investigating why. But if we get taken off, don't forget the Telegram channel. Let me launch the podcast now. It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. If it was, come back next week at the same time.